Okay.
Have you been making charcoal then? Biochar?
Sorry, Sean, say that again.
You said you got charcoal all over your desk. Have you been doing something?
Well, no, just I was playing with a piece yesterday in the in the talk, and I was fiddling with it in my fingers, and there was bits of it everywhere. So, but yeah.
Well, I'm
hoping we're going to make some at the weekend.
I want to make some. I've never done that before. So
yeah,
I
have a little stove, which is tiny.
Yeah.
Which well, I'll double check. I don't know what I've done with it. I was going to show it to you, but I'll bring it with me anyway. A tiny little stove that makes biochar and cooks on wood gas, which is clever. But then we'll try doing yeah, no, it is. It's really clever actually. So it gasifies the wood, and when it's finished cooking, it just leaves the charcoal behind. So
that's amazing.
Yeah. So you can have carbon negative cooking. We've adapted that idea as well. It was one of the sort of practicals that we do when we're working in Uganda or with refugees or whatever, because obviously cooking on wood is a really big deal over there. And if you can do it in a very, very efficient way and eliminate smoke, then that's a big achievement. Smoke being the #1 cause of avoidable disease in the majority world, in inhalation of wood smoke. Eye damage and lung damage, respiratory damage. So if we can burn wood hot and clean, then we've really achieved something. Okay, well, I think, please go on, Sean.
I was just saying that's very interesting. I've never heard that before.
We'll do a little bit on sort of the thermal combustion, you know, and things like that, because it's a really, really interesting subject. I'm actually going to touch a bit more on biochar today. I don't know whether you had a chance to look at any of the videos I posted last night. But,
yeah, I watched them all.
All right, okay, good, good. Well, the Schauberger is mind-blowing, actually. I rewatched it as well. I've already watched half of it.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting. It's log flumes and different things, and even the machines at the end, and he was getting into all sorts of stuff. Turbo type of thing.
Yes, and again, he was an observer of nature. You know, he got this just literally by staring into the river and asking himself, why does the water, you know, behave like that? And so it's true to say it really does fit in the, you know, in the permaculture mindset, if you like. And there were plenty of proto-permaculturalists who predate the P word.
Yeah.
What a Michelle. Morning to you. Oh, she's gone.
She's back.
Hiya, good morning.
Morning, Borodar. How are you?
Good, thank you. And you?
Ready to roll?
Yes,
we're just
indeed.
chit-chatting about biochar and stuff, and also about Schauberger. I don't know if you had a chance to look at that video, but I ended up watching half of it last night, and it's yeah, very inspiring actually, really interesting. These certain people who were keen observers and asked questions, really, you know, some of them really broke into new ground. And to think that this 2 generations beyond Schauberger, they're still only now beginning to get close to repeating some of the, you know, some of his experiments and some of his observations. So that's really great. So I thought I'd start with as a 10-minute video. It's a TED talk. Apologize if you've seen it before. It's energizing. It's like up tempo, and I did start recording. Yes, I did. Okay, here we go. So this is Ron Finley. He's an entrepreneur in Los Angeles. I think he makes sports gear. And this is a TED talk he did a few years ago, actually. It kind of made him a bit of a celebrity in the permaculture world. And my friend Sarah Pugh from Bristol has actually gone and visited him. And there's some other great stuff actually going on in the States. Hi, Lydia. Nice to see you. And here we go with Ron Finley.
I live in South Central. This is South Central. Liquor store, fast food, vacant lots. So the city planners, they get together, they figure they're gonna change the name South Central to make it represent something else. So they change it to South Los Angeles. Like this is gonna fix what's really going wrong in the city. This is South Los Angeles. Liquor store, fast food, vacant lots. Just like 26.5 million other Americans, I live in a food desert. South Central Los Angeles, home of the drive-through and the drive-by. Funny thing is, the drive-throughs are killing more people than the drive-by. People are dying from curable diseases in South Central Los Angeles. For instance, the obesity rate in my neighborhood is like 5 times higher than, say, Beverly Hills, which is like probably 8-10 miles away. I got tired of seeing this happening. And I wonder, how would you feel if you had no access to healthy food? If every time you walk out your door, you see the ill effects that the present food system have on your neighborhood? I see wheelchairs bought and sold like used cars. I see dialysis centers popping up like Starbucks. And I figured this has to stop. So I figured that the problem is the solution. Food is the problem and food is the solution. Plus I got tired of driving 45 minutes round trip to get an apple that wasn't impregnated with pesticides. So what I did, I planted a food forest in front of my house. It's on a strip of land that we call a parkway. It's like 150 feet by like 10 feet. Thing is, it's owned by the city, but you have to maintain it. So I'm like, cool. I do whatever the hell I want. Since it's my responsibility and I gotta maintain it, this is how I decided to maintain it. So me and my group, LA Green Grounds, we got together and we started planting my food forest, fruit trees, you know, the whole nine. For vegetables, what we do, we're a pay it forward kind of group, where it's composed of like gardeners from all walks of life from all over the city, and it's completely volunteer, and everything we do is free. And in the garden, it was beautiful. And then somebody complained. The city came down on me. and basically gave me a citation saying that I had to remove my garden, which this citation would turn into a warrant. And I'm like, come on, really? A warrant for planting food on a piece of land that you could care less about? And I was like, cool, bring it. Because this time it wasn't coming up. So LA Times got hold of it. Steve Lopez did a story on it and talked to the councilman. And one of the Green Grounds members, they put up a petition on change.org. And with 900 signatures, we were a success. We had a victory on our hands. My councilman even called and said how they endorse and love what we're doing. I mean, come on, why wouldn't they? LA leads the United States in vacant lots that the city actually owns. They own 26 square miles of vacant lots. That's 20 Central Parks. That's enough space to plant 725 million tomato plants. Why in the hell would they not okay this? Growing one plant will give you 1,000, 10,000 seeds. Okay. When $1 worth of green beans will give you like $75 worth of produce. It's like it's my gospel. I'm telling people, grow your own food. Growing your own food is like printing your own money. All right. Thank you. See, I have a legacy in South Central. I grew up there. I raised my sons there. And I refuse to be a part of this manufactured reality that was manufactured for me by some other people, and I manufactured my own reality. See, I'm an artist. Gardening is my graffiti. I grow my art. Just like a graffiti artist, where they beautify walls, me, I beautify lawns, parkways. I use the garden, the soil, like it's a piece of cloth, and the plants and the trees, that's my embellishment for that cloth. You'd be surprised the soil could do if you let it be your canvas. You just couldn't imagine how amazing a sunflower is and how it affects people. So what happened? I have witnessed my garden become a tool for the education, a tool for the transformation of my neighborhood. To change the community, you have to change the composition of the soil. We are the soil. You'd be surprised how kids are affected by this. Gardening is the most therapeutic and defiant act you can do, especially in the inner city. Plus you get strawberries. I remember this time, it was his mother and the daughter came, they were, it was like 10:30 at night, they were in my yard. And I came out and they looked so ashamed. And I saw, I'm like, man, it made me feel bad that they were there. And I told them, you don't have to do this like this. This is on the street for a reason. It made me feel ashamed to see people that was this close to me that was hungry. And this only reinforced why I do this. And people ask me, Finn, aren't you afraid people are gonna steal your food? And I'm like, hell no, I ain't afraid they're gonna steal it. That's why it's on the street. That's the whole idea. I want them to take it, but in the same time, I want them to take back their health. There's another time when I put a garden in a home in downtown Los Angeles. The guys, they helped me unload the truck. It was cool. And they just shared the stories about how this affected them and how they used to plant with their mother and their grandmother. And it was just cool to see how this changed them if it was only for that one moment. So Green Grounds has gone on to plant maybe like 20 gardens. We've had like 50 people come to our dig-ins and participate, and it's all volunteers. If kids grow kale, kids eat kale. If they grow tomatoes, they eat tomatoes. But when none of this is presented to them, if they're not shown how food affects the mind and the body, they blindly eat whatever the hell you put in front of them. I see young people and they want to work, but they're in this thing where they're caught up. I see kids of color and they just on this track that's designed for them that leads them to nowhere. So with gardening, I see an opportunity where we can train these kids to take over their communities, to have a sustainable life. And when we do this, who knows? We might produce the next George Washington Carver. But if we don't change the composition of the soil, we will never do this. Now this is one of my plans. This is what I want to do. I want to plant a whole block of garden. Just where people can share in the food in the same block. I want to take shipping containers and turn them into healthy cafes. And now don't get me wrong. I'm not talking about no free shit, because free is not sustainable. The funny thing about sustainability, you have to sustain it. What I'm talking about is putting people to work, getting kids off the street and letting them know the joy, the pride, and the honor in growing your own food. Opening farmers markets. So what I want to do here, we got to make this sexy. So I want us all to become evolutionary, renegades, gangster gardeners. We got to change we got to flip the script on what a gangster is. If you ain't a gardener, you ain't gangster. Get gangster with your shovel, okay? And let that be your weapon of choice. So basically, if you want to meet with me, if you want to meet, don't call me. If you want to sit around in cushy chairs and have meetings where you talk about doing some shit, If you want to meet with me, come to the garden with your shovel so we can plant some shit. Peace. Okay.
Great stuff. Moving. He he invokes a lot of emotion in his talk. I like that one. Okay. He talks about being an ecolutionary. I like that. Oh, we've got messages. Yeah, great stuff. Really fab. Give me that. Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay. Now, yeah. Well, it's little things that jumped out at me. To change community, you have to change the soil. Again, it just sounds like a throwaway thing. He really means that. And think about think about the impact of that. Gardening as defiance. I kind of like that as well. And he talked about having a dig in, an event where the people might be recruited to go along and help and take part in a community growing project. Think about how you might engineer community connections in that way, connecting people to a place, to the soil, and to each other. He says also, so many people are not aware how the food you eat affects the mind and body. I think that's interesting as well, because obviously it does. You feel very different on a healthy diet, rather than ram full of hyper processed food, which is very much the American experience and increasingly becoming our experience. The theme for today, the principle, is principle 3. So our 4th day, and principle 3 is about yields. Obtain a yield. You can't work on an empty stomach, or as I like to say, life's no fun without breakfast. But seriously, it's that energy thing. Is that we're always confronted with that. Okay, so in terms of our priority, of our order, of this sequence, permaculture starts with observation. We learn, we take stock of the situation, we ask ourselves what resources do we have, we do a survey, we think about what are our objectives, what resources do we have around us, are there alliances we can build to enable us to make that, to work towards those objectives. Catch and store energy, okay, we want to hold on to available resources, we want to start making compost, trapping water, but we can't go long before, oh, I'm hungry. What's for lunch, what's for breakfast? So a yield, but I'm also going to go much broader than obviously just thinking about yield in terms of how do we earn money, how do we grow food. There's so many other yields, and in fact, Ron Finley touched on many in his short talk. How we might do a set of a strategy, a behavior, a project, or something to create all sorts of different kinds of yields. Which might include accommodating nature and biodiversity. It might include the yield, might be improving the soil quality, improving, energizing your community by changing the soil. Yields can be obviously knowledge and learning and accumulating experience. And so here's another thing, is that the more we kind of push the envelope, the more ambitious we are and the more creative we are, the greater the yield potentially, because we're always learning more. So again, as if we are constantly observing, interacting, pushing ourselves to experience new things, then that builds the yield. Okay, so I have a presentation called Yields in Permaculture. Share screen. Yields in Permaculture, here it is. Share. Okay, good. So I'm going to go through this as a way of starting us off, and okay. So and is maybe a little bit African in some respects, this presentation, but it's also it's general. The icon for obtaining yield is a turnip with a big root vegetable of some kind with a bite taken out of it. So again, it's reminding us that we're also producing yields, but also those yields need to feed every element of in the system. So when we start to think more about gardening, we're thinking about we're not just feeding ourselves. In fact, primarily we're feeding the soil. And if we can strategically in garden feed the other elements within the garden system, then we're also removing or negating the danger of sort of pests, because we'll try and build a self-regulating system. We'll come to that. We'll come to that as we move forward. But testing on that. Let's go back to forests. Let's go back to how nature expresses itself. We have a beautiful, what looks like a really pristine natural environment. Looks really beautiful, and we have a large river. I can see a tributary coming down the hill at the back, and a large river snaking through this environment. And we see that every surface is covered in trees. Every bit is forested. If we look into it closely, we can see that there's lots of different kinds of trees, lots of different heights. It's a complex three-dimensional environment, maybe light coming in from many different angles. There's going to be a real diversity of yields happening within that. Imagine how many large mammals, maybe apes or monkeys or something, I don't know where this is, all the different kind of species that it might be supporting. I think I read somewhere that it takes 7,000 hectares of jungle to support one pair of jaguars. So again, thinking about our sort of trophic pyramid, that these really key species at the top need a very, very large ecosystem to maintain them, for them to be able to survive. In the same way, they're having a relationship with a very large area of land. Think about when it rains on this landscape, how efficiently this landscape also is going to be able to protect itself from erosion, because every bit of the soil is covered. And imagine how that rainfall, the long complicated journey that rainfall would have to do to even landing here to get to the river. It's going to interact with so many different plants and allow each one of those plants to develop its own yields as well. So I think one of the things we can think about is we've really grossly simplified the natural world, eroded into its diversity and its capacity, so that the actual total yield is very much less than what it was, and than what it could be, than the potential, because we simplified these really complex systems into very linear, simple monocultures. Anyway, just a kind of an overview. Just keep sort of visiting really nature's patterns, what nature wants to do, and realizing that that's our template to learn from. That's certainly what was inspiring and educating Victor Schauberger to make his really very, very interesting observations of natural systems. And watching the Schauberger video, I watched the first half of it anyway, last night again. So many of the terms that we've been using about observation and natural principles and stuff, so many of those terms were then reused in there as well. So echoing that permaculture is very eclectic and is allowing itself to be informed by the observations of many different observers of nature, and we're sort of filing all of that away into our sort of overview. Short-term, medium-term, and long-term yield. So we've got to create yields not just for today, but for tomorrow, and for next year, and maybe for decades in the future. I know in some traditional societies, if a daughter is born, it's the responsibility of the family or whatever to go away and plant a whole bunch of trees. Maybe go and plant a teak forest or something that when that daughter gets married in 25 years' time or something, you can cut that down and pay for the wedding. That's a long-term yield. That's planning ahead. That's understanding the relationship between inputs and outputs as well. When the coronavirus quarantine shutdown was announced, first thing I did was I sprouted some alfalfa sprouts. I asked myself, what's the quickest high value nutrient yield that we can create? And sprouting seeds is one of them. It probably is the fastest way to create nutrition and a short-term yield. Obviously, we didn't know. Everyone was probably behaving slightly erratically at that time. We were giving very confusing and scary information, and we experienced shops being closed and supply lines being disrupted. So these are things which, again, we probably need to keep in mind, that at this globalized system, just-in-time delivery, food coming from halfway around the world, that's very vulnerable, isn't it, to disturbances, however they might come. Whether it's a virus, a pandemic, it could have been a war, it could have been an earthquake, extreme weather events, industrial action, terrorism, I don't know. There's so many ways in which our long-distance supply lines could be disrupted. So resilience would be about building yields and multiple yields into that system. Yeah, right, okay. Nice one, Sean. Yeah, the bread making, that was the thing, wasn't it? Suddenly, we're so addicted to our fresh bread. And there was Sean saying there was no yeast. And so he made beer bread, which you can make. So you can make, I'll talk a bit about sourdough though, Sean, if you'd like, and maybe not right now. Well, when we sit around the campfire, I'll bring some. Yeah, isn't that also interesting how there were certain sort of weak points in the supply chain? So okay, so you've made a sourdough starter using beer. Okay, because it's actually the same yeast in beer that is in bread. When you do sourdough, you're actually really looking to get wild yeast, a spectrum of lots of different kinds of yeast, because they're all there in the atmosphere. And yeah. All right. Great, Lindsay's got into it too. Yeah, I love it. I think it's yeah, it's great. So let's just think about that then, actually. Let's think about what's going on in both bread and in bean sprouts, because I think it's interesting to think about this. And I'm going to reference Michael Pollan, a book called Cooked. I don't know if you've come across Michael Pollan. He's a leading author, really good writer, a very good turn of phrase. And he's been investigating the food system, from growing, harvesting, choice of crops, how plants manipulate the world, how we're informed by that, how we digest them, how we cook food, and everything, how it affects us in many, many ways. Let's start with the bean sprouts. Why is it nutritionally superior to eat a sprout other than a bean? Because it can't have more energy, because it's not photosynthesizing. It's not green. It hasn't got any leaves yet. But somehow, if we sprout a bean, it's massively more nutritious than the original bean was, if we just ate the unsprouted bean. Why is that? It's interesting things to think about. And the answer is, of course, well, a bean is a seed, and the seed is designed to not be digested. It's got a little coat on the outside of it, and the nutrients in the seed, those nutrients are very valuable. It contains everything that plant needs to grow up until its first true leaf. So when a seed germinates, the first two little things that you see that come up are the cotyledons, that's the energy store from within the seed, and then you get the first actual true leaf, and it's only then that the plant starts to photosynthesize. It's only then that it starts to create its own energy. Up until that point, it's been running on seed power. It's been running on the stored energy within the seed. So that is locked away. That energy is intended for the plant to grow, not for you. You're supposed to eat the container of the seed. So if you eat a tomato, the intention of the plant, if it has an intention, the evolutionary function is that those seeds pass through you and then you become the vector to propagate the tomato. The same way as the giraffe was propagating the acacia tree. So yes, the plant is packed full of nutrition, those seeds are packed full of nutrition, but no, they're not really available to you in a form which is easily digestible. So when we cook peas and beans, we often, either we pick them really fresh, like our little green peas that we like, sweet garden peas, or we cook them like in a dal or a hummus, and we cook them to a mush. So they've really, really been broken down. And we've added a lot of energy then in the form of heat to then make it digestible. So in other words, if you're eating unsprouted beans or not very well cooked beans, your body then has to supply a lot of energy to break it down. So you're not getting very much directly from the food. So what happens obviously in a sprouted bean, the plant itself contains the enzymes to digest the chickpea, whatever the bean is. The enzymes are within there. So as you soak it, it comes alive. The plant itself is releasing enzymes, and those enzymes are now metabolizing, starting to digest and access the nutrients within the bean. So just at a certain point in its sproutage, in its as it evolves, as it's forming, there's a point where there is a maximum nutrition, and it's just a few days in, just after. So there's your short-term yield. There's a very interesting way in which we can greatly add value to a food, and then actually a lot of the vitamins and the trace minerals and things which are in that seed are suddenly all being mobilized by the enzymes of the seed itself. So that's so your first way of processing or cooking food. If we define cooking not as using heat, but as using an external process to transform the food to make it more digestible, then sprouting a seed is your easiest form of cooking, processing food. So there we go. There's our first thought. The second thought is wheat. The grains that we depend on, there's a lot to say about wheat. I'll keep it narrow. So let's talk about sourdough. The grains that we depend on, wheat is one of the core ones. It's also a seed, isn't it? So actually, it's not very digestible. It's quite nice actually if you're walking through a wheat field to pick a few ears and chew on a few grains. It's kind of nice, but it's a lot of chewing and again a lot of work of muscles and you digesting and things to access those nutrients. So what do we do? How do we make bread digestible? How do we make wheat digestible? Is we crush it up into a powder, make it into flour. We soak that flour in water, and yeast and bacteria, the lactobacillus and the common yeast, get into that mush of flour and water, and it starts to ferment it. Fermenting means digesting it. The acid taste, the sour taste in sourdough, is caused by the lactobacillus. That's the product of its digestion. So again, is about primary and secondary sacrifices. If you like, we're letting the primary digestion of that wheat be done by the yeasts and the bacteria. And the thing about sourdough is it's much, much better for you than industrially produced bread. And industrially produced bread has just one form of yeast, and it's done in a way in which, they want uniformity and they do, they want to do it in very large industrial processes, and they want it to be fast. The difference about sourdough is instead of having one kind of yeast, you're using dozens, because you're allowing an open ferment, so you're allowing the air to interact with the environment. And yeast is everywhere, yeast and bacteria everywhere, microbes are everywhere. So they will find your flour and water mix. And essentially what they're doing for you is they're slowly digesting it for you. So with sourdough, we have much longer fermentations and much slower time, much longer time for rising. I don't know about you, I make mine I start my bread making in the morning, and I don't probably cook it until the evening. So it's had 10, 12 hours to ferment and to rise. So in that process, it's been properly broken down and digested, and it's much more digestible. So yeah, anyway, a diversion, but I thought I like to think about that. And that's been part of my journey and my education in the last 2.5 years now. Since I read Cooked, I started making my own sourdough, and I have not gone back. I live right next door to a corner shop, and 9 times out of 10, if we've got no bread in the house, I will make some rather than go buy some. Occasionally, I'll go and buy some bread rolls or something, but it's always a disappointment. You think that sort of white, crunchy white sliced bread with some thickly spread with butter would be a kind of a naughty treat or something, but it's always a bit of a letdown. It's not as good as the sourdough. Anyway, there's my thing. Anyway, so, but that's another way kind of yield, isn't it? Is we're adding value to something by processing it in a way in which it's much healthier, much more digestible. Few years ago, actually it was quite a few years ago now, when I was working in Reading on the roof garden project, which was, I finished that in 2005, so 15 years ago now, but I was driving down to Reading for a few days and coming back to Wales to be at home. So doing some motorway experience and, you know, eating lovely motorway sandwiches and filling station sandwiches, you know, just horrible. I started to swell up like a thing, like I don't know. It wasn't so much being fat, it was just it's not good stuff. Anyway, we don't need to think about that. Anyway, so all of that's been a relevant revelation for me, and to think much more carefully about, you know, the processes of food and stuff as well. So short-term, medium-term, long-term yields. Let's get into that a little bit. These are the people, actually really extraordinary people that we worked with in this place is called Numanzi. It's a training centre belonging to the Norwegian Refugee Council. And the people that are standing in a circle, there's me, look, with a translator. And they are South Sudanese refugees, and some of them are Ugandan home community people in this district, which is called West Nile. And most of these people have fled conflict in South Sudan, intertribal conflict, political conflict. They come from, I think we were told there were 12 tribes and 8 language groups. So there's a diversity of people. And so in working with them, one of the first yields, one of the first objectives was to try and make people feel that they were in a group. And we were doing some activities and stuff here. So I guess the first point is, to developing yields takes some planning and organizing, okay? Sprouting a few seeds maybe doesn't take too much of a plan, but to developing long-term complex yields, you need a plan. And you can allow your plan to evolve as you move into it, but but you need to start with a plan. And then you could, if you like, you have a clear objective in mind. In permaculture, always say form follows function. So we have to have a clear objective. A good place to start in building your plan is team building. And, you know, part of your audit when you start the process, observe and interact, is who have I got to help? Who can I build alliances with to help me achieve my long-term goal? And if we're all pulling in a different direction, if we've all got a different idea about how to go about things, working with people very readily becomes difficult, becomes complicated. So I was very conscious as well that just the other side of the border, which was a few miles away from here, these people essentially been fighting each other. Obviously these are not combatants, these are civilians who run away, but essentially, you know, some of them are coming from different different sides of whatever divide there may be within their country, and some of them will have experienced extreme terrible things will have happened to them. You can only speculate, and just the trauma of having to leave your own home. So there's another thing which we realize in those circumstances, which is displaced people. If you've lost your terms of reference, you've lost your familiarity with the situation that you were in before, those people are very ready to receive new information. Oh, I'm in a new place. I'm a bit lost and disorientated. I don't know you. I'm surrounded by strangers. Okay, let's build a group. Let's build some cohesion. And we did that by challenging people to observe and interact. catch and store energy, obtain a yield, start to see the world as interconnected systems, to value local and natural resources, to produce no waste. We brought all of those principles into every behavior that we did within the training. So you need to maintain high standards of hygiene in areas where you have displaced people, maybe coming from different places, and we don't know the medical background of everybody. So we wash hands a lot. This was pre-COVID. It's very interesting. The mortality in Africa has been very low. The coronavirus has not done what they predicted it would do. We'll talk about that later another time. But anyway, so we catch and store that energy, that grey water, washing water. We put it in a big bucket. We built a compost heap. We poured the grey water onto the compost heap. So even the grey water that we're washing our hands to maintain our, to maintain sanitary conditions, is part of the yield. The food waste, part of the yield. So these are very, very simple things, but they're things that then to draw people together into a common cause or a commonality. We're working together towards distant goals now. We're already feeling in some way like we're a team. There's lots of fun games you can play with groups of people to make them feel like cohesive. That's lots of stuff I used to do when I used to do a lot of development education in schools. Quite a few of those ideas cross over to adults. Sometimes being really silly could break the ice, and whatever it takes. It's good to have a few ideas up your sleeve. And I have to say, the first couple of days of working in the refugee settlement, we had 3 translators. We were working in English and local dialect, Mahdi, speaking in Arabic, and using Ugandan languages as well. So to make it fun, we added Welsh, and we taught people a few Welsh words as well. Just to, I don't know, we thought everybody else is learning each other's language. So by day 4, we were coming into the centre and people were saying, Bore da, Sidaki. So that was kind of fun. Anyway. So team building, yield number 1, maybe. Trying to make it easier. So the participants of this course, the 40 people, they came from across huge areas, over 100 miles, where the refugee settlement's absolutely vast. There's over 1 million people there. And they came from different areas. There's a big settlement called Bidi Bidi, and it has 5 areas. There's Bidi Bidi Camp 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and on the other side of the Nile is Marji 1, 2, and 3. Marji meaning water, because we crossed the River Nile. Anyway, so a big area. So each of those people going back into the areas where they've come from, and with the training, 12 days training that they had from us, they then had to start initiating permaculture activities from within their communities. So they were spread up into about, say, 4 groups. So there's maybe about 10 people in each group. So I was heading to Bidi Bidi 3 with my team to meet one of the groups of 10 people. And the trainers that we've been working with, our team members, have been going out visiting in between. I wasn't there the whole time. But when I came back to visit, there weren't 10 people waiting. There were 200. This is a church. This is a thatched church, community building, a place of assemblage. So a place that people are comfortable with. I mean, to be honest, to be fair, there wasn't much else going on. So we were the kind of main event. But that was an extraordinary moment, was to turn up expecting to have 10 people and there being 200. So then against us that challenge, what the hell do you do with 200 people? How do we engage them and get them busy and functioning together, team building? How do we develop yields? I think I've got some pictures of that anyway coming on, but it is just like I said, it's an awful lot of thinking on our feet and doing this training, but it was very, very illuminating. And I'll pick up on that theme later on in the talk. Permaculture is designed for function. I'll say this quite a lot. Okay, say this quite a few times, so you get bored of me saying that. But it's form follows function. Doesn't matter what it looks like. Does it do its job? Is it? Does it? It doesn't matter what it's made out of necessarily. All that matters is that it fulfills the function that we want it to do. So within yields, simple way to develop a yield is through gardening. And we're going to go beyond just sprouting seeds. We can actually grow them in the ground, create plants that create new seeds and complete the cycle. This is a keyhole bed. It's a designed system to maximize productivity using local and natural resources and organic processes to produce food. Its pattern, its basic functional pattern is this. We've already said, don't stand on the soil. We want it to be aerated. We want it to be also able to hold as much water as it can. So let's design a garden that it's only, let's say, 60 centimeters okay, Lydia's here until 10, she's just saying, and she's also a fan of keyhole beds. Fantastic. They're really good. Obviously, the height is your choice. The diameter of it is, okay. See you, Lydia. Have a lovely day, and I look forward to catching up with you properly. Okay, she's got to run. You design it for you. So how far can you reach? So the idea is I can stand, or you can stand, the gardener may stand in the keyhole area, and from there you can reach all around the bed. You can reach this compost bin built into the middle of the bed, and we can also walk around the outside and reach and touch in, garden, interact with this bed without ever standing on the soil. So there we go. If we don't stand on the soil, then we don't have to dig it, and we've got a lovely, open, aerated soil. We're constantly feeding it. So we put our food scraps, our banana peels, our maize cobs, or whatever it is, here we are in UK. All of that goes into there. So when you have somewhere to put your food waste or your banana skins or whatever, then you're far more likely to do it. You know what I mean? It's like, and again, it's kind of like an African thing, but they have their compound where they live, and then they have way over there somewhere else completely their field of maize. The idea of gardening around the edges of their compounds is not common. And obviously, with keyhole beds, they're small units, intensive units. You have it close by your house, you can keep an eye on it. You can interact with it regularly. You can throw your grey water onto it. You can throw your orange, banana skins onto it. You can interact with it constantly, and it can feed you. So at first, people were skeptical, and they were like, "Well, it's really small, and it looks kind of funny." But as soon as they saw them how productive they were, these ideas took off. So the basic structure is, as well, of course, is we might scrape up some of the topsoil, and we might arrange our stones or whatever it is that we're making it out of. Because of course, the appropriate thing to make your raised bed out of is what's lying around. Not you say, "Oh, well, Steve showed me a picture of one made out of stone. I have to make it out of stone." No, you don't. You can make it out of whatever you have to hand. And so we can throw organic matter into the bottom, leaves, dead things, grasses, if we've got compost, goat manure, cow manure, whatever you've got, chuck it all in there and let it settle down, and then throw all the topsoil on top and then mulch it. And now we're ready. Now we're catching and storing energy. We're observing, interacting, we're designing something. We're designing something that catches and stores energy for the purposes of developing a yield. So there you go. We're rocking with our permaculture principles, if you like, and we're building something practical, and people can understand that. And the thing that we're building is building relationships, because now, I know where to throw my banana skin. Not only that, my kids do too, or my neighbors, whatever. And we've got a little management process in terms of going on with the bed. Okay, so there's our keyhole bed. That's the pattern. That's the concept. Okay, here's Godfrey, team member, Godfrey Opolot, building a raised bed out of sticks, and it looks like he's got some string, working with one of the refugees. Here's another lovely raised bed. This one's made out of stone. There's our little composter thing in the middle. There's it really nicely mulched to cover the soil. And there's us constructing it. So this was a few months ago in a place called Mbali in eastern Uganda. And I was there for a meeting. This in the blue shirt. This is Paul Odiwa Ogola. I already mentioned him, I think, yesterday. He lives in Homa Bay, Kenya. He's a very special, very extraordinary guy. And he worked with me. He trained with us in 2016. And then a few weeks later, opened his own permaculture training center in Kenya. And he is now, if I'm going to tell you about this now or not, I could just mention, look, I want to mention this because this is a big deal. Paul's directed his own training center. He's trained hundreds of people. He's now got dozens of teachers around him. He's creating a sort of a permaculture wave almost in his district, Homa Bay. Where he is, although it's quite close to Lake Victoria, it's all on the shores of Lake Victoria almost, it's very arid. And they suffer from water scarcity at times. They're currently suffering from that now. And there's no running water. They have to get water from wells and what have you. And the moment they're traveling a long distance to get water just to keep their gardens alive. Paul's just started a GoFundMe campaign. I need to talk to him later today because it's very, very ambitious. And I don't think he'll be successful unless we put some thought into it. But he wants to raise, I think it's about $15,000 US. I mean, that would sink a borehole that will provide fresh water for 48 villages. 48 village communities could be reached by one borehole. So suddenly that 15 grand doesn't sound like so much. And these communities that are becoming cohesive and building relationships through what? Through permaculture, through this guy, through this amazing person. So think about yields in that sense. Think about, we're trying to create change in the world. So, okay, sprouting beans is one thing. Feeding me is an important part of the process, but this is something bigger and different. So anyway, we'll get on to, we don't need to dwell on it too much, but anyway, there's Paul. So, and this guy here in the white shirt, his name is Rogers Wasibi. And Rogers is the chief executive or whatever. I don't have a chief executive. He's a key person in the Mbali Coffee and Honey Cooperative. And he works with 700 farmers from all over Mount Elgon, and he's showing them how to build sustainable livelihoods by replanting trees, because there's a lot of deforestation in the mountains, they have landslides. Replanting trees, but underplanting them with coffee bushes as a cash crop, bananas and other food plants, avocados. And then also underplanting the coffee with other valuable plants like hibiscus, which they harvest for tea and as a medicine, and integrating beehives. So his yield, he's built a guild. He's designed a guild, the fruit trees, the canopy trees, the coffee, because coffee is an understory plant, right? And hibiscus and the bees. So we've got a range of different yields, all of which support both income development and nutrition. And he's doing that in a way in which he's training people in permaculture, showing them plant guilds, and reforesting, restabilizing a badly eroded and degraded environment. Now, how's that for thinking? This is the power of permaculture, is what we do in small individual things can sometimes multiply together and create very big changes. And I think that we're in a time in the world when we need to make very big changes. So there we go. Anyway, I'm getting lost in the story slightly. Anyway, but there's Paul and there's Rogers. So I'd gone to Mbali to meet with Rogers, and he wanted he was keen for us to come to his house and meet his family and stuff. So we did that. And whilst we were there, we were just chit-chatting. And for some reason, Paul's a very big fan of the keyhole bed. So the keyhole bed came up in the conversation. And Roger said, "Oh, what's a keyhole bed? I haven't seen one." So rather than explain to Rogers what it is, he built one. Just there, and it took us a few minutes. He's got his kids involved, and I know his daughter and the next door neighbor and something. This is Ali Tabendeki here, there with the lovely shirt on. He's also one of our training team. Anyway, so whilst we were having a meeting talking about exporting coffee, we bought the raised bed. So we got an extra yield out of our system. And interestingly, I think, was that the same thing? I think he sent us that photo of just a few weeks later. Yeah, it's the same one. Just a few weeks later, he got a yield from it. There it is. There's the vegetables. And he also has said he thanked us very much. Yeah, he had greens within a month. He sent me some pictures. Then these ideas had inspired his kids to do other things as well. And I gave him a copy of the book, Small and Slow Solutions. So he and his family were going through that, coming up with other initiatives that he could keep his kids entertained during the coronavirus pandemic thing. Anyway, so there's our keyhole bed. They can look how casually made it is, but it's still functional, it's still growing veg. Yeah, this lady has made one out of maize sacks. So woven polypropylene bags. You get a lot of you know, materials and stuff are supplied like that in Africa. Looks like she's got a Hessian sack there for her composter. But look, it's made out of different materials, but it performs the same function. She's growing some lovely chard in there, look. And yeah, a lot of the Central Africans, they don't seem to grow lots of the green leafy vegetables, but once you introduce people to that, they absolutely love it. Here's again a refugee family with they call it Suma Wiki, these cut and come again greens. And this guy is saying to us, there's me with Godfrey and Vicky and Gerald, with our little team t-shirts on. It's all about wearing a logo t-shirt when you're out there. Anyway, this guy in the yellow, he's saying to me, but what's so great about this is you cut it, and when you come back the next day, it's grown again. You know, this is pretty much on the equator. It's fairly high up. It's a nice climate. They, you know, most of the time they get good rainfall, so stuff grows like mad. So suddenly, even these quite small but intensive gardens were being highly valued, and people were getting. Because imagine if you're in a refugee settlement, you might get some rice and beans or you know, maize flour or something given to you to keep you alive, but you don't get much else, and it gets very boring. Vegetables are expensive. Vegetables are very expensive out there in remote places. So again, the people who we showed how to grow, firstly for the home, but also for sale, were very, very happy. And actually we found it quite quickly became significant incomes for them as well. So these ways to produce, so I would say this is if the sprouted beans and things like that is a short-term yield, these are medium-term yields, aren't they? They're things that take, well, weeks to develop, especially in the tropics, so things come pretty quickly, weeks and months. Somehow, the process of doing all of this, the learning is a higher value yield, and that's, if you like, that travels further. Someone said to me once, knowledge weighs nothing to carry, and I thought that was an interesting idea. So there's Paul again, and thinking about a sort of the long-term yield, if you like, of investing in him as a trainer, and then what we've done is we've maintained links with him. I've supported him with small amounts of money, not in a regular way, but to see him through various little mini crises that they might have gone through. He had a health issue. His wife had to have some kind of gynecological operation, and he broke an arm and had some medical bills. So we've supported him in small ways, just the odd £100 or two. And what that's allowed to happen is that over, well, it's now 4 years, he's now become a very, very adept, skillful and active permaculture trainer. And we have a lot of loyalty to each other and a deep understanding of each other. And that understanding is based on 3 ethics and 12 principles and a bunch of design tools. That's what we have in common. He's first language Luo speaker, which is quite common around the lake, around near Kisumu. But the Luo people who are marginalised in Kenya, so it's very hard for them to get government jobs or be a teacher or or something like that. So they're very focused. He was very focused and very motivated to be self-employed, and not to chase after sort of just wage employment for the day rate wages. And so again, being in permaculture has enabled him to become quite a successful, relative for his community, entrepreneur. He now has his own house, got a motorbike, and a lot of respect. He said to me even a couple of years ago, he said, Steve, what you've showed me, or what I've learned through permaculture, has enabled me to become someone in my community. Someone that people stop and greet and notice, rather than just being another kind of invisible person. So there's another yield, right? Is esteem. Again, going back to our Maslow's hierarchy, esteem and self-fulfillment is very, very important part of life's journey. And with that esteem and self-fulfillment comes confidence. And that, if you have a bit of confidence, that gives you an ability to plan further ahead, to be more strategic. So here we go. So, and from Sector 39's point of view, one of the things that we're now thinking a lot about is how do we find and create more pools, and how do we replicate and reinforce these important pioneering people. We're very lucky to have met some of these people, and that's very much part of the yield, the longer, wider term yield about permaculture. Definitely education and training, personal empowerment, advancing confidence, so that we can plan further ahead and reach more people. From the Permo Africa Training Centre, Paul started training his friends and peer group and then local farmers. He's now reaching out further and further. He's traveling and doing training in other communities, but he's also inviting people to his training centre. So look, there's the raised bed, there's the keyhole bed again. And look, if it works once, he's gone to some areas and showed them a simple demonstrator, something. It's small, it's focused, it's compact, it's intensive. And then the community said, well, if that works, let's replicate it. So if it works once, it can work again. So look, this community's built lots of raised beds, and actually experimenting in design, using choices of local materials. We're seeing a lot of kale. Okay, so it's a little bit modern. We're seeing lots of pumpkins over there. There's a tower there. I'm sure they're beans or climbers or something. And look, with this attention to detail, and I think another part of the keyhole bed strategy is it's encouraging you to give attention to detail, to focus your energy into one place. So look, it's beautifully mulched. We're seeing no bare soil. We've got very, very clear pathways, clear access, so people can easily garden. They're not always bent over on their haunches anymore. And it's very clear where to stand and where to garden, and very clear signaling. So even if you could come into this growing system, not really understand what was going on, but you'd very quickly figure it out. And this is kind of transformative stuff. Simple ideas combining together to create long-term, very valuable things. Here's in Clonbutland High School, we're designing and planting a tree guild, and engaging with some of the kids through, this is the GCSE Welsh Baccalaureate program, and we managed to link this into some curriculum outcomes and objectives. And so I'm just trying to check where we're going. Okay, so in terms of yields, in terms of maybe making inroads, it's been very challenging, really, actually, is to get into schools properly and to really try and change the ethos. I can't say we've succeeded yet, but even just to be able to to come in and gain some experience. It's been a starting point, and it's something which we really hope to be able to build on. And yeah, okay. So longer term yields. Let's think about that. So we've been short-term, some short-term yields to medium-term yields for growing and gardening. We'll look into the growing and gardening bit quite a lot more yet, obviously. But let's also think about longer-term yields, about forest systems. And I want to talk a bit more about that because I think you could say this is the ultimate expression of the natural form is the forest. That's the most evolved form, really, with the most biomass, with the most complexity, with the most number of species within it. So we're really interested in forest farming, forest gardening, forest systems, because they're longer term. So here's another thought: is that when you sprout a seed and you're establishing that seed to become a seedling and then a young plant, that's when it's most vulnerable. That's where if you have a few days without rain, they die. If you have a locust attack like they had in Kenya last year, you lose your crops, and then you're in all sorts of trouble. You get a flood, you get a drought at the wrong time of year, and all of your cabbages fail. You're in trouble. You've got nothing. So if we can bring diversity in, can we bring diversity into the mix? And therefore, because the thing with a forest system is, of course, even if the locusts come or we have the leaves grow back, the plants don't die in the same way that annual plants do. Trees can survive longer periods of time without rain. Sometimes they can survive drought and deluge to a certain degree, and fire possibly, depending on the tree. So we have systems that obviously they're more resilient and they can recover quickly. And within a forest systems, you have more of a diversity of yields as well. So we really value our annual veg. Annual veg is a very good way to generate a medium-term yield, but it's not the only thing we should focus on. So we're going to look into forest gardening and tree guilds and things like that a little bit as well. And this illustration is off the cover of a book called Forest Gardening. I think it's called Forest Gardening by David Jack. A double 2-volume book. It's quite an investment, but it's a great book. And in this picture, this is a pear tree. This is a temperate forest garden, so one that we might recognize. And in it, there's a whole bunch of different plants with different root depths, with different shapes. And possibly each one of these plants is relating to the soil and the nutrients in the soil in a different way. Look how this pear tree, its roots are mainly close to the surface. It's doing most of its feeding close to the surface. These are tap roots, anchor roots to stop it falling over, and also maybe reaching for water. But it's feeding close to the surface. Trees and grasses can be very competitive with each other. In fact, under trees in a woodland system and with woodland edge plants, you tend to get a soil that is dominated by mycelium, a fungal rich soil. And that's because there's a lot of carbon and in the soil, high carbon soil, which is formed under trees where you've got leaf litter and twigs falling all the time. And so that's the type of soil that would form. Under grassland, you get a much more of a bacterially dominated soil. And so where you have trees growing in grass, there is a competition going on between the two. They're favoring different conditions. So if we can find plants which are more woodland plants and which favor those kind of more high carbon, fungal dominated soils, then they become companions. And that we can plant shallow rooted plants, like these might be strawberries or something like that, shallow rooted plants that cover the surface. We can plant those quite close up to the trees because they work as a companion. They're covering the surface of the soil, protecting it from sun or any kind of erosion, but they're also not competing with the tree. Now we've got, so these are our shallow rooted plants. We might also want to bring some deep rooted plants in. And the deep rooted plants, I think we've got asparagus is one here, and maybe comfrey or something like that. They have these deep rooted plants, obviously can access minerals and bring up humidity that the other plants can't reach. So they start to work together as a team. Now, as this plant is growing, so is it being eaten. It's constantly, maybe a cow comes along, graze on it, or maybe just insects eating the leaves, or they might just die off. And obviously, these nutrients from down below and then being constantly deposited on the surface. So again, we've got now an interesting relationship between the deep-rooted plants, the shallow-rooted plants. The tree gives some shade. The tree holds the soil together, and then also we have some medium depth roots. Look, we've got essentially the root patterns form into kind of three basic shapes. There's those that stay very, very close to the surface. There's those that go really, really deep down and mining the deep soil, and then there are those that kind of sit in the middle, kind of halfway. We've got shallow, medium, and deep. So our guilds of plants, simplistically, the pattern formation, the pattern that we're looking at, is to stack those three root types together. And to a large extent, the more we can work with diversity with that, then the better systems we get, the more efficient that system gets. So we'll go into the forest gardening thing a bit as well as we go forward. And that's something which I've been very interested in for a long time. And on Saturday, when we're when you're at the farm, we will go to Llanfachlin, and I'll show you forest garden I've been working on over the last few years with the school and community. And I believe, anyway, yeah. So we can see that for real. And then yeah, okay. So there's this introduction to thinking about tree guilds, and again we can go into this a bit more detail. Here is a forest garden in Rwanda. This is my friend and colleague Rose Nibagweri, and yeah. Anyway, she's a permaculture teacher in Rwanda. I met her in 2018. She came to a training that we did in Uganda. And then immediately she went back to Rwanda and worked as an assistant on a PDC in Rwanda, run by a guy called Greg Nibbs, an Australian permaculturist who was, and a mentor of a friend who had been mentored by Bill Mollison, actually. I never met Bill. The closest I've come to meeting Bill is meeting Greg. And anyway, this is great. This is Rose's forest garden. It looks really big and isn't. It's actually tiny. It's right by her house. She's in the southern district of Rwanda. And she's leaning on a guava tree. And behind her, this is coffee. You can see coffee beans, coffee cherries. And this large leaf plant is taro. That's a carbohydrate yield. I can see bananas behind. She has avocado. She was talking about treating malaria with artemisia, with wormwood. That's what she was growing that there. Many aromatic herbs, actually, which they use as insect repellents and as well as flavoring food. Layers of tree crops. They had cassava and really. What have I got? I've got a list there. Yeah, banana, coffee, medicinal herbs, taro, maize, guava, avocado. Okay. And I think this garden, I'm not sure if she planted it since her PDC, where it might only be 2 years old. But again, in the process of doing this, she has, a lot of her neighbors asking questions. There's a sort of a developing interest in what she's doing, and also she's diversified the yield. She lives with her mother, and they are harvesting little bits of food from this garden every single day to augment the stuff that they're growing in their fields, maybe a bit further away. So thinking about that, and how forest gardening has given a longer term, more stable yield, and has also enhanced Rose's kind of status again in the community. because she's doing something interesting and experimental, and she's learning. So she's now, actually, she sent me a slideshow. I might show you that actually, of take a bit further into the stories behind each one of these people, because they are permaculture designers, next generation, you know, and that's part of my yield, if you like. So I'm trying to think about how can I replicate myself. I can't be doing this forever, you know. So behind her actually is Theodore, and that was the first time I'd met Theodore. We spent a few days together in Rwanda. He's from Congo. He's from Democratic Republic of Congo. He's also trying to set up a regional permaculture initiative in Eastern Congo in the Kivu district. And actually he wrote to me yesterday asking whether I would help him be a trustee or something, one of his projects, the project he's developing. And I'd like to do that, but again, it's time, isn't it? It's difficult. I'm increasingly interested in, I think Rwanda is an interesting country, and I think Eastern Congo is very interesting. I met some really great people from there. The Eastern Congo is a bit messed up, but there's some great places too. And anyway, multiple yields, using simple ideas, but to really reach out and connect to people in a way in which creates actual change in the world. This is what we're trying to do in permaculture. There's Rose's garden. There's my garden. There's the Risk garden. So I think I might have shown you this picture already, but look how similar it is. Look, there's Rwanda. There's Reading. Same patterns, different detail. We've got, you know, obviously we've got our overstory fruit tree layer. We've got some smaller shrubs and berries, herbs, herbaceous plants, and there's like lemon balm growing there, and all sorts of different things. On multiple layers, again, thinking about that layering within a forest. And what's great, and what's so fun about the Reading roof garden is quite a few of the plants, obviously the trees are all in the same place. Nearly everything has actually flourished. We lost a few things, not many. But a lot of the understory plants have moved around. They've chosen where they want to be. The lemon balm and the Japanese wineberry and I don't know, you know, all sorts of different things have moved around. They're self-seeded. So it's now at the next stage almost of its processes. The garden's now matured enough that it is self-seeding. That it's changing its shape, and the mix of plants, you know, it essentially by itself. Another thing that I noticed about the Reading roof garden is I was walking to it, maybe last year or somewhere from where I was staying at my friend's house, and it's quite close. I was walking down the street. I was, I don't know, 300 yards. I don't know how far I was away from the building. And I could see fennel plants growing up in the cracks in the pavement. And I saw I identified at least a couple of other plants that have escaped from the garden and are now popping up in other parts of Reading. So that's part of the yields too, isn't it? Is it's sending that out there. Again, just a little list here. Originally, we put in 170 species of plants. I have no idea how many are there now. Probably a similar number, to be honest. Some will have been shaded out. Some might have not quite survived there, but most have. And I know also people have been adding things, and again, exploring that idea is where's the upper limits to productivity? Where's the upper limits to yield? Can we keep adding things, you know? So these multiple layers, overstory trees, understory trees, shrubs, herbaceous plants, ground cover plants, climbers, and then think about, we've even got a Chinese yam in there. So we've got a yield coming from the root layer, and we're also growing various different kinds of fungi up there as well. So what's that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe 7 or 8 different potential layers in that woodland. 7 or 8 different types of yield coming from it. And those are things that we can use: timber, nuts, fruit, berries, herbs, you know, tubers. There's a lovely plant in there called Apios americana. It's a relative of the groundnut. It's a nitrogen fixing climber, and it has little very carbohydrate rich little tubers that it sets in the ground, and we were researching about that. And apparently indigenous Americans, First Nation Americans, people used to use it. They would crush it up and it makes a sticky gloopy paste, really like wallpaper paste, and they used to use it to set bones, broken bones, so like plaster of Paris. Diversity of yields, so many different things, and when you stack and layer them together, and again, what's interesting is many of the plants in the Reading roof garden are from, say, deliberately part of the design was to represent the sort of global family of species that feed us. So we've got plants from South America, plants from North America, plants from China, plants from Africa, plants from, you know, wherever, all growing very happily together. So maybe that's a metaphor for how we really can all live together. Yeah. So another picture of the roof garden. Yeah, okay, so we touched on some of these things, but again, back to plant guilds, designing, building a banana circle. This is another one of our, it's not one of our trainers, he's just a Facebook friend actually, Felix Achicho. He's very active in Kenya, doing permaculture. Here is his swale. Now, in the tropics, they have fantastically heavy rain. Literally, it can come in a few minutes, but it can be like, you know, it feels like it's yards, I don't know, it's a lot. And so obviously when it accumulates, you instantly get very high water level that goes down very quickly. So they build, some of them are building their swales to reflect that intensity of rainfall. So very deep, sometimes they look like big gashes in the ground. And I wasn't sure originally whether people were really doing it right, but in terms of functionality, yeah, it works. So it's important. Danger of erosion. Now we talked, I think I've talked a bit about vetiver. Have I talked about vetiver? Yeah, I mentioned it in the Chimani Mani thing, of course. So again, we're interested in permaculture, interested in these kinds of long-term, these are prairie plants from North America, but we're interested in plants with very big, deep root systems that can be good for stabilizing soil. So one of the plants that fits into that is lemongrass. This is lemongrass. So Felix is growing lemongrass to stabilize his very deep water catchment ditch. And he's ensuring, obviously, the rainfall's infiltrating into the ground, and he's stabilizing it with the lemongrass. But that's also giving him a yield, because obviously lemongrass is a culinary herb. And and also, again, these essential oils are all pretty good for repelling mosquitoes, and we can make mixes of essential oils from different of those aromatic plants, and it's very effective actually. When we ran a big course in 2018 that then went into a conference in Western Uganda, and we made big spray things of mixed up of lots of different kinds of essential oils and just left them all over the table so that people could use it in the evenings and things. And they were heavily used, and everybody remarked how effective they were. So these again, thinking about layering in different yields strategically, they're going to fulfill very different kinds of functions. So Felix here is, you know, strategically designing his land to catch and store water, strategically adding plants to stabilize that system, but in a way in which it is in itself a yield. So this is how we want to think. Every element must perform multiple functions, and we must support key functions with multiple elements. These are the things that we need to keep fresh and alive in our brains when we're designing, when we're thinking permaculture. So we talked about how our multifunctional swales might be, and how we can then use excess moisture to establish a guild of plants that maybe in themselves represent short-term, medium-term, and long-term yields. In this system, we've got pasture. So this is a system within a grazing system. This has been added to a grazing system, and we've got a lovely contour swale here, which is going to break up any surface flow of water, obviously trap it, include it to make it infiltrate into the ground. And then we'll have a plume of water traveling slowly underground which then can nourish these plants. So again, look, we've got a stacked system, a 3D system. There's the fence, we're going back into pasture. Here's bamboo, has one yield. We've got a tree for timber. We've got a tree for fruit. We've got some nitrogen fixing shrubs. We've got ginger and taro. We've got some medicine and carbohydrate plants. And then we've got maybe some more fruits. And then here we go, another timber tree and maybe bamboo again. But so we look at how we've got a range of yields, all carefully stacked together in a guild, in a way in which it harvests water and nourishes the pasture and creates some shade, some windbreak, and other things for the animals that maybe in that grazing system. So look how we can, again, just a similar representation of a similar idea. This one's got some ducks in it and geese, whatever, enjoying the humidity. And again, this could be like a really wide hedge, or a variance going through what might be a pasture system, or even a more monocultural system. We can add a whole layer of yield and diversity and function by planting these swales through it. So again, okay, 10:28. Okay, we'll do one more slide and then we'll have our 15-minute tea break. Here's so we just talked about a multifunctional swale. We can plant it to reflect the needs that we might have. It might actually meet the needs of, say, the cattle in the grazing system. We saw that yesterday with Chris Dixon, who's growing plants that he could throw down for the horses. Maybe these might for us. We might have different grazing animals going through the swale part. Here we've got some poultry. Or we might design our system also to have a windbreak effect. Now, it could still do all of those other functions, couldn't it? But it also is a windbreak. So, and this is how windbreaks work. If you build a wall and the wind hits the wall, is what happens when an unstoppable force, the wind, hits an immovable object, the fence. Well, one of two things is going to happen. One is the fence is going to blow over, or the wind is going to hit the wall and it's going to create turbulence. It's going to bounce around, isn't it? Because it's got to go somewhere. That force hasn't been stopped, it's just been deflected. So what happens is the wind hits the wall and bounces back and creates turbulence on this side of the wall. And then it'll go up and over the wall and it'll create turbulence on the other side of the wall as well. So walls don't necessarily create a windbreak. They can often create turbulence and create more confusing wind patterns. So you get a lot of that in cities. And you also get sort of corridors of wind channeling through things as well. You get a lot more around buildings. In nature, it's kind of different. And in nature, where we have plants, when the wind blows through those plants, they sway around a bit, don't they? They absorb some of the energy of the wind, gets absorbed and translated through the tree. Oh, sorry, Sean, I missed your question from a little while ago. You said it's obviously about the raised beds and the round beds, is why we put the compost in the middle and not all over. So we by concentrating the compost together in one place, we get better biodegradation. We get more of the right conditions for biodegradation, for it breaking down. And then secondly is that compost in the middle will very quickly transport around to the rest of the bed by microbes, by worms, by fungi. So because the bed's really quite small and focused, that's enough. You can put the compost in one place, and the actual biology of the bed within the raised bed will move it around for you. So that answers it for you. And so my final point before tea is that so the wind is going to blow through these trees. It's not a windbreak. It doesn't stop them. But what it does is it slows the wind down a bit, because some of the energy has been taken out of it. So the air that's flowing behind hits, if you like, slightly slower air, so it goes up and over. It lifts it over. And a well-designed and constructed windbreak can create a significant effect. So it's saying we've got 35 mile an hour wind being lifted up over the trees, whereas in the shelter, it's only 10 or 15. And it also talks about how where it will deflecting snowdrifts as well. So strategic placement of systems and elements to fulfill functions, and we're stacking functions together. So we've got forest, we've got nature, we've got yields, we've got water infiltration, we've got privacy, and we've got a wind shelter. All of that stacked together yields. Okay. We shall see you all again at 10:45. Let's have a cup of tea and a stretch, and I'll look forward to seeing you then. I will pause the recording. Okay, and we're back in the room. As I say, we're back. So I actually just about got to the end of that slideshow, which was the last two slides were just about building teams, working with other people. I'd kind of made that point already. This is visiting a training center called Connect Africa. It's an American gentleman here in the shirt, and his wife and the zebra stripes. And there's me with my friend Nandi, Zainab Nandi. She's from Walsall. She lives in UK. She is originally from Uganda. And in the middle is Clovis and Tafakabiri. And Clovis is a refugee from Congo. And he's a really great permaculture trainer and hardworking guy. So he's on our training team too. And part of what we're trying to do is obviously find ways forward for people, especially people who've got, talents in these areas. I just sort of said, really, working with people is human connections, improved skill, knowledge, and experience is an important part of the yield of your farmed system, of whatever it is that you're doing. The ability to train people, firstly yourself, and to learn new skills. But as you learn new skills, so may you pass those on. The more you learn through observation and interaction, the more knowledge you will have to share with your peers, family, and community. So I also put a little subtitle that knowledge is also a yield. It's important to mention that. And a final slide of this slideshow is of Serifa Rashida. She is one of the residents within the Bidi Bidi settlement, and she did the 7-month permaculture sort of process with us, and within that 6-month period, she'd already written a constitution and registered her own permaculture association for the people that she was working with in Bidi Bidi. And what they did was that they created a savings and loan scheme. So when they started doing really well, selling their onions and their greens, and she's banked 2 million Ugandan shillings, which is about 400 quid, that's a lot of money to generate from within a refugee settlement. And they're using that money to buy seeds for the next season and tools and things. And again, just think about being a dislocated person. You lose your social support structures, maybe your family support structures, maybe things that might come from your tribe or your community and your religion or anything like that. Where do you go to get those few dollars that you might need to buy next season's seeds? And you're starting from scratch. So again, part of that yield is that sort of self-help, mutuality. I think there's a real look of pride and achievement on her face there as she's slightly coyly posing for that photo. So I asked her if she would mind. Let's go here next. I hope you're enjoying your exploration of yields. And this is this gentleman here in the blue is a special man. We call him Andrew Bamboo. His real name is Andrew Kalema. This place is district called Nakaseki, and it's to the north. It's about an hour's drive north of Kampala. Dirt roads off the track a bit, and it's a piece of land that his father bought. Actually, his father was a keen buyer of parcels of land, and as he's got older, Andrew's become very interested in that. He was an athlete when he was a young man. He competed for Uganda in the Commonwealth Games and other sort of, I don't know, international competitions and stuff. So that he's well travelled. He's a very intelligent, very erudite gentleman as well. He worked for a leading newspaper. He was a journalist for 17 years, he told me, in Kampala. So he's a great communicator, really, really good. And I think he got tired of all of that. Maybe the lifestyle city wasn't that healthy. Might have had some health issues. I don't know. But anyway, he decided to prioritize growing and farming. And he's about the same age as me, kind of mid-50s, maybe he's early 50s, a little bit, maybe a tiny bit younger than me. Anyway, he decided to prioritize. Can you see this? Yeah. And he's just a process that's growing, but he's approached it in a very, very interesting way. And sorry, what have I done? Why have I lost the picture? So I just got a bit stupid momentarily. Okay. We're back. Okay, so there's Andrew chatting to our little team. There's Clovis, the Congolese guy, and Nandi, and this chap is called Enoch, Kazura Enoch, and he's also an inspirational guy. As someone I brought on to try to bring into the Sector 39 family. He said to me when he was 22, how important it was to be inspiring to the younger people. He himself was an orphan. He grew up in an orphanage. He is now taking care and responsible for a bunch of orphans himself, and using permaculture as a tool to increase the yields to help support the people that he's caring for. And we're all there to talk about forest gardening. And so as Andrew Bamboo, his specialism is, amazingly, is bamboo. But there's such a diversity of different types of bamboo, and there's so many different things you can do with bamboo. And a few years ago, we met on the internet, and I invited him to come along to do a PDC. He came, I think, on the 2016 one, or the first one we did in Uganda, and it really, really resonated with him. And then from there, a great connection and sort of friendship has grown, and we remain in touch. So whenever I can, I go and visit his place. Here we are at his place, just having a nice chat and enjoying and again, I'm also very keen for people I'm working with to to network, to meet, to cross-pollinate these connections, because every one of the people in this group I've met and worked with previously, except for the chap in the white shirt, actually, his name's Franco, who's a new person. But I'm trying to connect them together to build a guild of people, because each one of these people has a different root system. Each one of these people, if you like, has different things to give and different needs. As soon as I name checked everybody else, I'm going to name check Faisal, guy here in the hat. Faisal Rashid, he's our driver, and he's a great guy too. He came recommended this is when we were doing the first bit of refugee training back in June of 2018. He came recommended. I just expected as a driver, right? So I just said he wasn't going to crash the car or be dishonest or whatever, or smell too bad. Those are the functions of being a good driver. But he was so much more than that. He is so much more than that. And every day we were doing training in these buildings. It was quite a hot day, hot place. And so he'd park the car in the shade of the building and put the seat back and, you know, have a little snooze. By day or 2 or 3, we were driving back, and he suddenly said, actually, guys, I've got some questions. And he pulled out his notes. And it became very obvious that he was listening in on the lectures too. And why wouldn't he? And he was really fascinated by permaculture, just overhearing. So we started taking a more and more active role in the actual training that we were doing. He'd come and pick us up from wherever it was we were staying, and I'd come down in the morning, and he would be chatting to the night security guard or something, and then suddenly, you know, in Ugandan, and then suddenly would say, "Oh, by the way, this is the night security guard. This is his name is Moses, and he has a question about permaculture." So he just, his natural manner really is to engage with people, and very quickly to get people onto kind of meaningful subjects, and people might be asking, well, what are these white people doing here out in the bush or whatever? And the answer is, they're permaculture teachers. Oh, what's permaculture? Well, there you go. Conversation begins right there. So on the subject of yields, again, that sort of people skills, accumulating skills, and building teams is a big part of it. So Andrew's place, he's, again, part of what his sort of genius is what most people do is they had a bit of forested land, is they'd remove the trees, and then they'd put in the trees that they want to grow and their intended species that they want to create, yields that they want. Instead, what Andrew done is he's gone and looked at the indigenous native plants that have chosen to grow on his land, and he's working out how to use them, how to utilize them. And he's coming at it from a point of view of valuing every element that's already in the system, and finding out how to use it, or how to push it, bend it, you know, tweak it so that it becomes part of the total yield of the system. I think that's really clever too. Yeah, so here we are, just doing the normal chat. This is what we were here for, really, was to buy bamboo seedlings. And it's just kind of core of his business. Andrew was saying he just can't produce enough. Tries very hard. It's hard to get reliable staff. Hard to, you know, whatever. You've got to sort of build your capacity in lots of different ways. Again, he's trying to do a polyculture forest garden business, not a monoculture of bamboo. Bamboo is a remarkable plant. We don't know that much about it here in the temperate climates. It's multifunctional. It's one of, or if not the fastest growing plant on Earth. It gives you more biomass than anything else. Very, very tough and resilient. And yeah, many different yields from it. For reforestation, for stabilizing landscapes, feeding wildlife. Don't forget, it's the #1 food of the mountain gorillas in Uganda. Incredibly important. It's very good along waterways. Its roots stabilize riverbanks. Actually, in Rwanda, they use it very strategically on riverbanks for exactly that, for stabilization. Uganda, they have taken it for granted much more and decimated the natural bamboo forests. And something that people like Andrew are obviously trying to challenge and help resolve that. So one of the key yields of his food forest and his forest garden project is selling the plants. So he has a nursery within it, which is selling the plants. So that's one of his main yields, and he has many different varieties that he's a caretaker or custodian of. But he also is developing a training center on site. He's building a little bunkhouse, and he's very keen to do training as well as part of his yield. And I'd love to be able to regularly send groups to him or help him achieve that objective. Bamboo is very beautiful. It's very it's nice to observe it, to see how it works, to see how the structure of the plant. That it has these nodes. We have these tubes, and then these nodes where we get new growth coming from there. That seems to be where the plant has its ability to grow, to bud. Some bamboo, you can layer them, get them to touch the ground, and they'll root again, and you can make more plants. Now, there's a beautiful plant. We know from looking at the shape of the leaf and the shape of the seed pod that this plant here that we're looking at is a legume. It might even be carob, actually, I'm not sure. But anyway, so maybe it has different kinds of yields, but again, just thinking about multiple yields. This is something that really blew me away. I was really impressed by this. Andrew's making his own soil. And if you've got a plant nursery, like he has, then when you send your plants out to your customers, you do not want to be sending them in soil that has disease. You do not want to be, obviously, sending around bad, unhealthy plants, and you don't want to send diseased soil that have the pathogens in it or whatever, damaging things. So, and get in the tropics, everything grows so quickly, everything happens so quickly. So you don't want to get anything wrong. Because things can break down quickly if you make a mistake, a bad mistake. So Andrew does this, and I'll show you some other photos that reinforce it. But this is how he makes his soil. He makes biochar. It's just going to spoil the reveal of the thing if I jump out of water. Probably is, isn't it? He makes biochar, and he makes it out of the bits of wood coming out of the forest. He gets lots of bamboo offcuts, sticks and things. He's a forest farmer. He has lots of wood residues, and especially lots from the processing the bamboo, making cuttings, making new plants, lots of surplus. So he sees that as part of a very important part of the yield. And this is his biochar kiln. When I first went to visit him a few years ago, he had one in a metal can. A lot of people who make biochar start off with metal cans. He's upscaled it now. He's built this lovely brick kiln, and there are air holes in the brick kiln. There you are, 1, 2, 3. You can see them. There's another one down the bottom. You'll notice that they've been sealed with mud, and that's so that when it's burning, Andrew can control the burn and by controlling the airflows. When you have a fire in a box and you can control the airflows, you can really regulate then how that fire behaves. It becomes very important. And it's open. I think I showed you. It's open to the sky though. And so obviously what we're going to do is we're going to fill it full of the wood that we're going to pyrolyze, the wood that is going to be the biochar. And then we're going to put lots of little sticks in. And those little sticks are going to provide the heat that's going to cook the wood. And then when we've got it all filled, we're going to put the roof on, and the roof is iron sheets, corrugated iron. And then to keep the heat in and to keep this, obviously you've got to control the airflow is the important thing. So what you do is he closes it off with iron sheets, and then he puts soil on top. And so as the burn progresses, so there's the wood he's cooking, there's the fuel, if you like, that's creating the heat. And as the burn progresses, you open and close these holes. The soil's all piled up on top. So the soil gets cooked. And at the end of the burn, he's got now sterile soil. He's killed all the microbes in it. He's killed all of the fungal spores in it. He's gone back to a blank canvas. Okay, so then he crushes that biochar he crushes the biochar into a powder. And now I'm going to zoom all the way back to the beginning. Try not to look, spoil the reveal. Nearly there. Oh, overshoot. Okay, here we go. So now, what you're looking at is soil that has been cooked, so it's sterile. It's mixed with crushed biochar, which is also sterile, but also they are ready to add qualities to that soil. But what about the life? We need some microbes. We need some soil biota. So he also said to me, I also keep goats, mainly for the manure. I loved him for that statement. He's valuing the outputs of the goats, the manure, more than the actual goats themselves. So occasionally he gets to eat a bit of goat, but really what he's keeping them for is he can process a lot of material. Again, very easy. Goats are very broad grazers, grazer browsers. You can, a lot of the waste plant matter from the food forest system can go to the goats. The goats give him high quality manure, which he composts. He composts it, mix it with the biochar, and then mixes that with the soil. So now he knows he's got a microbially rich soil, but then it hasn't got any pathogens in. He started off with clean compost, and so also is, yeah. So there's a yield. That's how, if you like, he's supporting the function of the nursery, which is selling plants, by a strategy, a set of activities which create then high value soil, which means his plants are healthy, his customers are happy, and he's not passing on disease. So I think this is good thinking. This is very smart thinking, and this is something that we could all perhaps do to varying degrees. There's Clovis checking out the soil. You know, it's good quality. It's good quality. So we're going around. This is a living fence, a living hedge on the edge of his property. Termite mound. Termites build their mounds out of clay. They sort through soil particles and find the fine clays, and they build their mounds out of them. So there's a ready supply of clay, which is what we use for building our cooking stoves. We went and robbed a bit off old termite mounds. Many uses for bamboo. There's his bean growing. I've seen a photo since of that completely. You can't see the trellis because it's all beans, but obviously this was just early in the season. But using local and natural materials to enhance the yield, make it easy to pick, make it easy for it to catch and store energy, simple but efficient. This is a rainwater tank that takes this, you can't really, it doesn't look very pronounced, but this is a little swale or a water ditch, which takes all the surface flow off the road. I think where we were by there's the road going past his property. So you can see compacted clay road, which means when it rains, there's surface flow on that road. And so he's put a little edge to the road, so any flow can be taken off and into this tank. He's got these sticks in the tank so that any little frogs or anything that fall in can get out again. And birds can perch there and drink. So he's just got a reserve of water. Very simple though, but by harvesting the flow off the road. Jackfruit. I think they come from Southeast Asia, but they're very established in Uganda, very popular fruit. One of those fruits is enough food there for a family. I mean, it's for feed a whole family for a meal. It's extraordinarily productive. It's an event. It's a high day and a holiday. You know, on a day when one of your jackfruits is ripe. The very sticky latex inside that holds the fruit together, so that they have a lovely sort of a system, a little process. It's quite a routine. They come with a big knife and cut it all up for you, and so forth. And usually the father of the household does it, and then they give you some special soap afterwards to clean your hand to get all the sticky latexy stuff off. But the fruit itself is lovely, and it's high quality yield that forms over a long term. That gives you ultimately very, very productive food plant. I think this was an experiment that Andrew couldn't quite work out what to do. He dug this hole, I think, maybe to contain water, but he was now thinking it might have another function. We were just wondering about that. There's Enoch by a taro plant. Let's just exploring. So this is coffee. Now, the coffee that we know and the coffee that we drink comes from Ethiopia. It is an African thing. And I think the Ethiopians were the first people to cultivate coffee and to celebrate it. This is a natural Ugandan variety. Andrew's vice, it's not really a vice, but his thing was he's all about his coffee. He has to have a big mug of coffee every morning. And so he's worked out he needs, I don't know, 3 kilos or 6 kilos of coffee a year just for himself. So he produces it. So one of the yields of the land is, you know, the energy that drives him forward. Just a nice way to think about that. But also he's growing a traditional Ugandan variety, a natural indigenous variety of coffee from much more local. So I thought that was a nice thing as well. So much variety. So here what we're looking at, oh sorry, yeah, this is black pepper. It's not the greatest photo. Black pepper is a vine. So again, it's a layer, one of the many layers within the food forest system, and there's the peppercorns forming. So green pepper and black pepper, they're just the same plant harvested at different times of the life cycle, and high value crop. High value crop pepper actually has many medicinal values as well. It has many uses, and he also propagates the plants and sells it. This is a termite mound, and the termites are doing very, very important work within the forest system. It's important to recognize the functionality of all the different species, and they're breaking down cellulose is a lot of what they're doing, and help building soil. They might make a bit of a mess in terms of whenever they change the shape of landscapes, but these termite mounds are resources in themselves. Look, the banana trees are growing very happily all around it. Yep, that's Clovis and our team. So this is a tree that we're interested in the tropics. And again, interesting to think about yields. This is a Musisi tree, or Musisi tree. And I took a few photos of it because I'm trying to remember the tree. I want to know it. Look at that lovely straight trunk. This tree might be 3 or 4 years old. Things grow really fast there. And right things in the right place and the right conditions get started, and you get that yield comes quite amazingly quickly. So there's 2 really important yields of this plant. One is obviously the biomass, the tree. That's a nice straight wood. You could build stuff out of that. You could split that into poles and you know, make structures out of it, or many things you could do that with. Firewood too, energy. People consume a lot of firewood there because that's how they cook. But also you notice that it has got that's the surface of the tree, the bark. You'll notice though that it has a nice canopy that has lots of small leaves, and the Musisi tree casts a 50% shade. So it's a nice shade tree. It doesn't exclude all the light. It hasn't got a dense canopy, but it excludes about half of the light. And in the tropics, in the equator, when you're growing vegetables, you often need to shade them. The sun is just a bit too strong, a bit too hot. 12 hours of sun every day is quite a lot for vegetable plants to take up. So you can integrate tree crops into your productive areas, and that 50% shade is that's the right degree of shade that you want for growing in those conditions. So plants with multiple yields, fast growing, biomass, fuel, construction timber, and a 50% shade. Lovely. You can again think about how you could stack that into a forest system, and extending the yield and doing this sort of 3-dimensional thing as well. Okay, chilies. Obviously, chilies are perennial, and we don't see that here because everything gets killed off in the winter. But once they get going, they're very, very heavy producers, and you get the kind of shrubby bushes. And you can ferment chilies to make chili sauce and things, which again is a great way of catching and storing the energy from the plant. And they use them a lot in pesticides, in organic pesticides as well in Africa. They mix chili and various other things together with things like papaya and stuff to make a sticky, gloopy mess, which you can then paint onto things which will control certain potential pest species. Here's back to the bamboo, and again, it's very beautiful to see how it grows, and the new shoot forms within a sheath that's like paper, and then as it grows, it pops out, and all the paper, the sheath falls away, which gives an enormous amount of biomass. I was trying to photograph the butterfly, which is very beautiful, and but actually what I did manage to photograph more was the leaf litter. That's what forms underneath bamboo plants, is all that sort of papery stuff gives you a fantastic mulch. It's really great. And so that's part, again, another element, another part of the yield. This is giant bamboo, and if you can't get the scale from it, if I was standing, I'd be about this high. It's, I don't know, 30, 40 feet high. I mean, in terms of biomass, that's awesome, right? It's a very hard plant to propagate, but once you've got it, you've got it. And there's something interesting about bamboos is that I only know this because Andrew said in his talks about it. Is when they set seed, they die, and you have to capture that seed. They're very, very small seeds. They don't last for long. So it's a kind of you've got to be on your toes. Some bamboo plants live for 2 or 3 years, set seed, die, grow them again. Others live for 8 years, 10 years, 30 years, 50 years. Some varieties of bamboo, they don't know if they've ever set seed. No one's ever seen it. There's layers of mystery to. They're still trying to understand this amazing plant, and it's difficult to propagate the giant bamboo. One of the things Andrew was trying to do was pulling one of these big branches down, stems down until it's touching the ground. They call that layering. And where those nodes on the plant are, if they're in contact with the soil, then you can persuade them to grow roots, and then you can cut that section out, put it in a pot, and pass it on. So some types of bamboo do that more readily than others. These all things Andrew is studying and learning. So in some ways, it's all part of his yield is developing a specialism and understanding this plant, especially this plant, but not in a monocultural way, in a polycultural way. So we're having some lunch. There's the coffee he's been making, and they look like some things. And there's our chapatis, which we were having for our lunch, and they've been served inside a bamboo serving thing. So that's really nice. Andrew's exploring all of the different things that he can do with the bamboo. So yeah, burning it, making biochar out of residues. We've seen that bit. This is part of this chimney system for when he makes the biochar. So once wood pyrolysis is happening, once you've got the temperature up and you've driven off the moisture, the wood gas will burn with a smokeless flame. But as you're reaching that temperature, you can get quite a lot of smoke coming out because there's a partial combustion happening. So at that first stage of the process, what Andrew does is he puts this around the flue of the chimney, and what it does is it condenses the smoke, and he can get wood vinegar. He can actually distill extracts from the wood smoke, and then get specific compounds, which then again he uses in organic pest control processes. So capturing different yields, and by developing a specialism in an area in which he can extract, very valuable and very different kinds of things just through having an understanding of a process. So I think that there's a great sort of agility to this, of ability to do this. Just hard to catch it. I was using it with the flash. I don't really like flash photography, but it's a bit dark in the shed. But what you can see behind as well, I think I've got photos of it, is, there it is. There's a good, there's another butterfly look on it. You can see that there's somehow a jacket that makes this, looks like the smoke must come up the middle and then maybe back down the outside, and somehow it cools it, and he can distill off the wood vinegar and other compounds that come off it. Now, I didn't fully understand the process, but he was just very quickly explaining what he was doing. And I just thought, wow, that's another very interesting observation. This is a top bar beehive made out of bamboo. Another yield from a forest system is honey, obviously. Really nice. We're going to go making tools. This is black bamboo, another really beautiful variant, different species. And here's a food dryer. They look like peppercorns and coffee beans, maybe, I don't know. A whole bunch of stuff that he's drying. He said he wasn't happy with this yet, hadn't quite got it working. But the principle of a food dryer is thermal convection. It's not really heat that's drying the food, the seeds and things that are in here. It's air moving across it. And all we need to do is to create a convection current. So if it's warmer at the top than it is at the bottom, warm air rises. The warm air rising takes away the humidity and is replaced by air that's slightly drier. So that slowly dries out the what's inside the food dryer. And there's one of his attempts at catching and storing energy. There's the famous goats in their little hangout. Yep, that he keeps for the manure. And there, look, is his compost pile there, right there in the goat shed. I guess that's where you want it. You don't have to go very far. So he charges for guided tours. He's building his encyclopedic knowledge. He sells his plants. He eats almost exclusively from the garden. He's got chickens and goats. He feeds the chicken. Now, chickens are very vulnerable to parasites, especially in the tropics. You can end up giving them a lot of medicine. He feeds his chickens to keep them healthy, oregano, which is very good for intestinal parasites, and crushed up biochar. So the biochar helps the chickens digest their food. It helps get rid of any internal parasites. And then also is obviously then the chicken manure contains bioactive biochar as well. So something that, again, different yields, supporting the sort of core functions of the garden, and using the permaculture knowledge in as many ways as he can. This is his number one helper. I've forgotten her name. She was there 2 years ago when I visited before. So she's obviously a long-term member of his team, and a very valued worker she is as well. And here's her helping us choose some plants, which we're buying to take to start off a permaculture training center somewhere else. There's the black pepper again. But just like everywhere you look, there's productivity. Everywhere you look, there's different yields that he's cultivating from the land around. He's even growing some marijuana. We all had a bit of a joke about that, but he says he was using it as a medicine for his animals. I think to the chickens, actually. I said it makes you go mad if you ingest it. So anyway, there's our team. And actually, it was an uplifting experience being there for the day. As I said, I've now known Andrew for 4 or 5 years. Even his assistant I've met now a couple of times. And again, part of the yield is the team building. It's the feeling part of something and going somewhere with it all. This is us making mud bricks out of a compressor. Maybe that's a slight diversion. So stop at that. Okay, there we go. So there was a little visit to Andrew Kalema's food forest, and something which I think for me reinforced. Before we do the biochar, I wanted to just go back to forests. I want to talk about coppicing. This is something which this is a very valuable technology, and this sits very well with the biochar. This is part of a slideshow some of which you've seen, talking about succession in forests. But we only went so far into it because we're making a different point. And in this slideshow, I wanted to also explore the components of forest systems that we know about the trees, but there's so many other elements within forest systems that are so important. And just while we're at it as well, I like to point at different plants and think about what they tell us and what they might be about. So different yields within forest systems and forest edges. So the forest garden is really modeled on the idea of a forest edge, that part of the forest perhaps where there's more light coming in, a clearing perhaps, or yes, on the edge of a forest, or where there's a water course or anything like that, where there's the ability for the light to reach all the layers within the forest. If we just got a closed canopy, we're not going to have, in a temperate climate, we're not going to have very much on the ground. But there's many plants that love that dappled shade you get on the edge of a clearing or on the edge of a bit of woodland. And again, I'm thinking about those swale systems and things I'm showing you, things we've built along contours, is they've got so much edge to them. They're letting that light in from all the different angles so we can have a diversity. Now, within our systems, you often have paths. Where you have a path, you compact the ground, don't you? And also people walking on paths, there are certain seeds and things get promoted. They stick to your shoes and what have you. And so in the process of walking through a landscape, you interact with it and you change how certain things are promoted. And one of those plants that gets promoted by walking along paths is this one. And this is greater plantain. I think it's a wonderful plant. It's really, really interesting. I notice it, it's everywhere really. You see it a lot in grasslands, always see it around gateways and on the edges of paths. And that's because it's a compaction plant. It can grow in compacted soil. And in fact, it kind of favors that. And it's promoted by you walking on it and actually spreading the seeds around. Nearly always when you see it, there's little holes in the leaves where it's been stood on and maybe slightly damaged. It doesn't seem to mind that at all. It can cope with that. Greater plantain is wind pollinated, and these stems here are you have it has male and female flowers, and the male flowers obviously to provide the pollen, and which is wind blown, and then these are receiving it. And wind pollinated plants are way older.
Sorry, Steve.
Yes.
I can't see the images. I don't know if the
How long has it been like that?
just a couple of minutes, all right?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
Talk about plantain. It's disappeared.
How's that?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Perfect.
Brilliant. Okay,
Thank you.
thank you for saying. Sorry,
No.
I rely on your feedback. It all runs on feedback. Thank you. So, greater plantain. Here it is. You've all seen it. I'm sure you know it. So firstly, it's ancient because plants and the evolutionary timeline, plants came before insects. And so the very old plants obviously weren't insect pollinated because there weren't insects. So they had to do wind pollination, which is much less efficient, isn't it? Because you've got to rely on much more random factors rather than a bee precisely going from one flower to another. With wind pollination, it's more random. So we know it's very old. So that makes me interested in it. And some years ago, I was teaching a permaculture course, and I invited a herbalist friend of mine to come along and talk about herbalism and plants as medicines. And she looked at the paddock at Chicken Shack, and she said, "Wow, you've got a field of ribwort plantain. There's other varieties. This is a greater plantain. There's also a ribwort plantain with a narrower leaf, but same family of plants, same functions." And I hadn't even noticed it. I just thought it's a field of grass. And when I looked, I realized so much other stuff in it, including a lot of greater plantain. And my friend then pointed out that, well, this is our magic medicine plant. Plantain's one of the most important temperate medicine plants. It's like, how didn't I know that? Why is it that we're always obsessed with things like echinacea or jojoba nut or something that comes from North America or South America, somewhere distant? Sounds exotic, doesn't it? We fail to value the plants that are in our systems. We fail to value the things that are everywhere here in the UK. And so with that one comment, really, Amanda, the herbalist, she really opened my eyes to the value of our own indigenous plants. We look down on them because they're common. And in fact, sometimes the really common plants are the best ones, like this one. So what medicinal qualities does it have? Well, it's interesting that you can make a salve from it. You can make a balm. You can make, what we did was we harvested lots of the leaves on a nice sunny day. So they're energized by the sun. All the right juices are, if you like, in the plant. We cut them. We wilted them in the sun a bit. We'll let them dry just a tiny bit, reduce the amount of moisture that's in there, make sure they weren't wet with rain. And then we threw them all in a big pot with olive oil in it, with cheap, whatever, low-grade olive oil in it, and we simmered it over a cooker. Not so it was boiling, but just so it's warm, and stewing it around, making sure there's lots of exchange into the oil. Then we sieved it all off, pressed it, so we just had now the oil infused with the plantain, and then we took beeswax, grated up a couple of sticks of beeswax, and put that into the warm oil so it melts, and then it sets to an ointment. It's not solid, but it's not liquid. It was a nice. So, and what can you do with that? It's perfect for abrasions, for cuts, grazes, stings, scratches, the kind of things you get from gardening. And interestingly, the kind of damage you think the plant would experience from being stood on, and somehow the properties, if you like, that maybe it uses to protect itself, also what it conveys in the medicine that it makes. I don't know how true that is. That's just my own speculation. I thought that was really, really interesting. And then we discovered that comfrey is very good for as a medicine plant as well, for, again, scratches. Comfrey is also used to extract toxins from you and also to help mend bones. One of its common names is knit bone. So the other thing we did was we grated up comfrey root and mixed that with plantain and made a salve, an ointment from that, which again is really, really good at all those kind of minor bangs and bashes and scratches that you get. Great for kids and things like that. It's non-toxic. I think with a dog ate one of the things, it didn't make it sick. You know, there we go. Part of the yield, part of observing the diversity in a system and learning how to value the common plants. Maybe in the same way as I was saying about Andrew, that instead of getting rid of his common indigenous plants and putting nice avocado trees or something, he did the same as he started to try and value what was there and see how he could create yields from what the land wanted to grow. So yeah, there's our plantain. Scots broom. So there's something. So yeah. So yeah, there's our nitrogen fixing plant. This is how we build ecosystems. This is how our forests build themselves. Is they give away sugars in very handy little packages. This is obviously elderberry, which bring in the birds. The birds eat insects, stop the insects from becoming pests by regulating the populations. They feast on the seeds, on the berries, so they spread the seeds. But also importantly is they cycle phosphate. In doing that, harvesting the insects and harvesting the berries and the seeds, the birds are then cycling phosphate. And phosphate does what? It supports the roots of the plant. So as an ecosystem is developing and the phosphate starts cycling around, and the ecosystem itself now can build stronger root structures and can carry on developing. There's a nitrogen, phosphorus. Higher up in the hills, we get rowans, again as a sort of primary colonizer plant. Very brief story, a quick anecdote. I mentioned the book Feral by George Monbiot, and in the book he name checks a forester from mid Wales, a guy called Richie Tassel. He's moved away to Cornwall now, I think. But anyway, he spent a long, long time around here, and he was one of the leading sustainable forestry people in Wales. And one of the ways that he learned a lot about forestry was by replanting an upland. He lived at a housing cooperative that's called Dunin, which is on the road to Aberystwyth. It's been between Machynlleth and Aberystwyth up on the hills. It's about 700-800 feet above sea level. And they bought the land above the house. It was actually an old hunting lodge or something. And they eventually, after some years of living there, they managed to buy the sheep desert, the sort of mountain above their house, and they fenced it off and kept the sheep out. And the idea was to put the forest back. So they went and got lots and lots of different species of trees and little saplings, as little one-year-old whips, and a dozen different varieties, and oak and ash and whatever it was, and elm and lime and whatever it was that they wanted. And they even tried to design to, we'll have a stand of that over there, and we'll have a stand of something over there. And it was quite a big landscape. Loads of volunteers came, all went up there and planted all these trees. Going back a few years later, what Richie noticed was that a lot of the trees that they planted had failed. Very high in proportion had failed, especially higher up, and especially the more sort of, shall we say, climax forest trees. And that's because the ground's just not ready to support something like that yet. Again, Jeff Lawton says in one of his videos, a forest grows on a fallen forest. You know, you've got to have those pioneer trees have got to live and die to build the soil and the mycelium and the conditions that perhaps that we need then for the more complex trees to grow. So when Richie was observing this and he's going around looking at all of these trees that had not taken, what he noticed was this, was wherever we dug a hole to put in an oak tree, dug a hole to put in an ash tree or something, is that tree hadn't taken, but 10 rowans had come up. 10 rowans had come up in the hole that we hadn't planted. What's going on? Of course, what's happened is the rowans were there already. The rowan, because they've got this lovely juicy berry, birds are eating them, the landscape's peppered with rowan berries. And they don't really germinate until the soil gets broken open, until the sward, that suffocating grass that actually prevents trees from really getting established, is broken open when you dig the hole to put the tree in. So the lesson came from that was, you need to introduce your pioneer species plants. The pioneer species plants are often there already, and to allow them to start, all you need to do is to scuff up the ground. So you go in and create some kind of disturbance, and that can actually allow then the succession to get started. So that one experience gave Richie a massive insight into the way that forests work, the way that those systems work. Succession, that's a story about succession. More juicy fruits bring in the birds, and juicy fruits bring in the birds. Here's the the kind of berries and the hips and the things that are very, very important part of forest systems and part of the grazer browsing things and soil building. Another very interesting thing about brambles, and we can talk about this a bit when we're walking around at Trevlock Farm, is on the edges of woodland edges are interesting places, is you'd often expect to see brambles growing there. Brambles like to grow in full sun. Brambles are highly mobile plants, aren't they? They grow up and tall as they can, and they fall over, and when they touch the ground they root, and then they grow up and then they fall over, and when they touch the ground they root. They get boing, boing, boing. They work their way across the landscape. In what direction are they traveling? They're always traveling from the shade to the sun. So there's a leading edge of woodland extending itself out into the pasture. Brambles do this, and they go over each other and they create a almost impenetrable jumble. So if you were a sheep or some such creature, grazing creature, you probably wouldn't want to go into the middle of that bramble thicket, because you're going to get your fur caught on it. You're going to get all tangled up in it. I've seen sheep really tangled up in brambles. So what they do is that they push those grazer browsers away a bit from the forest edge, and within that tangle, trees can come up. Trees can get established and get to a point of growth without getting eaten, without having their apical buds snipped off all the time by a passing grazer browser. So brambles also are part of this dynamic edge of a forest. And then of course, as the trees that they have nursemaided grow up and start to build a canopy, the bramble is now getting shaded out. So off it goes, boing, 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 off into the light again to find a new space. And again, those seeds are everywhere because the bramble's a very generous plant. It's feeding everybody else, and consequently, its seeds are peppered all over the landscape. But it only grows in certain conditions, and it grows in the conditions that it's, if you like, it's evolved for, and it's part of how the forest protects itself and extends itself. Hello, puss. There you go. So I have little visitors coming in and out. There we go, brambles. Some people say, oh, I don't like brambles, and I'm always fighting against brambles. And it's like, oh, you don't understand brambles. Once you start working with them and understanding them, they're a fantastic plant for colonizing, creating edges, extending edges, moving edges. In Morocco, in the Atlas Mountains, they actually used to grow brambles around their gardens to keep the little goats out of. They'd harvest the brambles themselves and weave them together to create little fences. So again, they saw it all as part of the yield. Fungi is a bracket fungus digesting a tree stump, bringing that nutrient back into the soil again. So it's another way in which forests hold on to their nutrients, that all that hard work they've done building on that material, they want that to be back in the soil so that it can continue to nourish the forest. So when we're thinking of forest systems, I'm leading up to thinking more about forest gardening, and I just want you to just try to get away from just thinking about trees. That there's many other elements that make forest systems. Here's a young forest system. We're seeing young oak trees. This is in Scotland. And underneath it, we're seeing another very specialist forest plant. This is called bracken. Everybody knows bracken. Farmers don't like bracken because grazer browsers and browser grazers can't eat it. It's a bit poisonous. Bracken is a very specific plant though, and it's a forest plant. Where you see it all on the hillside is you're seeing a hillside that used to be a forest, and the bracken is the only thing that's endured. This is how bracken works. This is what it's supposed to do. It doesn't like dense shade. So we're getting strong bracken here because there's not much shade being cast by this young woodland. Under deeper shade, you just get the odd strand of bracken just there, here and there. You don't get these huge carpets of it. If a tree falls over in the forest, poof, up comes a big root plate as well, doesn't it? Now got a big expanse of bare soil. Very fragile forest soil that doesn't want to see the air, doesn't want to see the light. It's going to break down very quickly. So what happens when there's sudden light in the forest is plants will just flood in and cover that ground. And the bracken's the number one thing for doing that. It will quickly clothe and protect that forest soil. Bracken again creates a lot of biomass. Has quite a woody stem, doesn't it, that sticks around for months and months even after it's died back to the rhizomes it grows from. And that layer of bracken on the soil, even if it's there all winter, is a natural mulch. It protects the soil. It might be a degree or so slightly warmer down under that bracken. It protected the very fragile forest soil from maybe a heavy frost or a snowfall. It's there to protect the soil. If a tree falls down and we create bare soil, the bracken is doing an important job. The bracken is also hyper accumulating potash. So any potassium that's mobile in the forest floor is locked up by the bracken. So if we can harvest bracken, put it all in a pile, add some nitrogen to help break it down, and we're going to get a nice nitrogen and potash rich soil, compost. So very important, valuable yield within a system is bracken. You don't harvest bracken when it's fresh and green and got loads of spores on it because they can be carcinogenic, I believe. As it's turning and drying off and going brown, that's where you can come with your scythe, you can harvest it, and you can make a big pile of it and compost it, and you're going to get really good compost out of it. In ye olden days, before they had straw bales, because straw bales are a product of industrial monoculture style of farming, the Welsh farms used to harvest the bracken and put it in the deep litter for their cows. They bring the cows in over winter, feed them on hay, silage, and put the cows in a barn so they're not too cold, that they don't puddle the ground with their feet in, poach the ground, or make it all muddy with their feet in the winter, and they don't get cold and waste too much energy keeping warm. So put them in a barn, stand them in deep litter, because you want a high carbon substrate to soak up all the nitrogen that's going to come from the manure and the urine of the cows. And what better to use than bracken? And the way they used to do it, apparently, I've never seen it done, but it creates a lovely visual picture. Imagine going to the top of the hill and you've got scythes or cutters of some kind, and you start cutting the bracken underneath and roll it. You go across, maybe choose a swathe, I guess, cut the bracken, roll it, undercut it, roll it. And slowly you start almost just like creating a carpet, rolling down the hill. So you keep undercutting, making this big ball of bracken, almost carries itself down the hill. Open your barn door, in it goes, spread it all out, put the cattle on top, job done. wait till the spring. As soon as the ground's dried out enough, you want to get the cows outside so they can start grazing again. And then you drag out all the bracken, put it in a big pile, compost it. There's your nutrients then to grow your vegetables. So another way to think about how animals in systems might will operate is they help concentrate lots of nutrients together, which you can then compost, and then use that extra focused facility to grow those plants that need really fertile soils, which is vegetables. So again, thinking more in systems and seeing the outputs, seeing the value of the different yields by understanding the function of that element within the system that it comes from. Bracken's there to mop up any free stuff that might be released by some kind of accident in the forest or something falling over, whatever, and it concentrates that potash together and in a high carbon structure, which is great for soil building, great for protecting the soil, great as a mulch, and great as a compost component within compost. Yep. So climbers. Again, we're seeing in this young forest, we haven't got many layers developing yet. We've got a sort of an overstory layer happening, and we've got the bracken layer. As forests mature, we get more niches forming. So here's a climber. Here's another climber. I thought this was an interesting. This was in Wales. I took this one. There's a pile of brash, of dead twigs. Someone's carefully tidied them up, and they put a brash pile. So it's a good thing to do, actually, on the edges of woodland where you do get lots of twigs. Imagine managing, cutting the lower hanging branches, or whatever, pruning, all that kind of thing. Get lots of twigs, and putting them in a pile actually helps them biodegrade. A nice tall pile helps sort of compact it down a bit, and that helps the wood biodegrade. But also interesting, we're seeing here's a climber that's taken advantage of that brash pile and growing all over it. So it kind of looks like it's growing, but it isn't. It's another plant taking advantage of it. Looks like a bindweed of some kind. And also think of the microclimate is, look, where's the sun is. There's a sunny side. All of the leaves are on that side. On this shady side, they're almost not there, and the ones are there are tiny. So there's another really good illustration of microclimate. We've got a sunny side, we've got a shady side, so we can work to differences, and obviously plants are going to optimize where they can harvest the most amount of energy. So this is the bit that I wanted to get to. This is the bit I'm just going to do a few slides on this, and then we'll take another quick break before we've got an hour till lunch. So this isn't my photo, it's a library photo. I kind of chose it because I wanted to try and illustrate the idea that even in a mature old growth forest, you might have trees that are hundreds of years old, even thousands of years old, but they're surrounded by young trees and other plants of different ages. This is the way that a tree seedling works. Now, I said to you that a seed obviously contains the energy for that tree, for a plant to grow to its first sort of true leaf. And then beyond that, it's now got to begin to photosynthesize to be able to carry on growing. Okay, so imagine that a lot of tree seeds are quite big. And we just said that the pioneer ones are very small. But think of an acorn, think of a chestnut, think of even hazelnuts or anything. Think of any of those. That's a big store of energy. That's quite a lot there, and that gives the baby plant quite a good start in life. It's got something in the bank to get started. So here's our baby acorn. Here's our baby chestnut. It's going to use the energy of that seed to grow up, produce its first true leaves, start photosynthesizing. Now, but it's germinating in the middle of a dense, closed canopy forest. It's never going to get enough light to live. It's never going to get light to become a mature tree. So they sit there. They don't really get much bigger. They get to a certain size and they sit there. And they sit there for, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, waiting for, just in case, this big tall tree falls down. If that big tall tree falls down, then suddenly there's loads of light, and suddenly then there's the possibility for the tree to actually get up into the canopy and to become a member of this mature forest system. So trees have the ability to sit at this kind of, almost to sit like this, like as a juvenile, sit there waiting. Oh, suddenly light, bang, off they go. They can shoot up and they can put on a few feet in just a year or two. In fact, some of the trees that we work with can grow 5 meters in 1 year. There's a kind of variety of willow I will show you on Saturday. It can grow 5 meters in a year. And that's pretty awesome, right? So what does all of that mean? So trees have the ability to sit and be kind of dormant, and then they also have the ability that in a sort of adolescent growth spurt, they can shoot up really fast. And then actually, after 2 or 3 years of doing that, they slow right down again. They can't maintain that. It's like a teenager. You know, sometimes you put a teenager to bed and then one morning and they're 4 foot, and then they come down to breakfast the next day and they're 5'6" or something, 6'5". Happens almost overnight. Trees can do that too. Okay, this is a chestnut coppice. So I hope we're comfortable with the word coppice, that we know that. And a coppice is a way of managing trees to optimize the yield. So this fits very much within the obtain a yield narrative. These are stools. It's what we would call a stool of a tree, of a sweet chestnut, which has been harvested previously. You can see from the cut poles, it's been cut off at the ground. I don't know if you can hear that, but my neighbour's dog barks at every single car that goes past. It's very, very wearing. We might have to have words. Anyway, I digress. I apologise for that dog barking if you hear it all the time. I don't know. So this is a stool, a coppice stool. It's been carefully cut to the ground. And it's also been cut in a way in which the surfaces of the cut throw water away from the tree. So if it gets wet, or when it gets wet, it's not going to rot. We'll also notice that these stools have been harvested in a block. You can see the new growth coming. These are the new, the tree already trying to grow back. They've been harvested in a block, and that is because these stools are in full sunlight, so they will grow back again. They're not being outshaded. If we go in amongst it looks a bit severe, doesn't it? But there's a reason why we would do that. These are mature hazel behind, chestnut behind. If we were to go in and see that this stool's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, let's say it's got 8 or 9 poles growing from it. If I just cut 2 or 3 of them out of there, because I didn't want to damage the tree, it wouldn't grow back, because those were then still in full shade. The ones that I've removed, so that they don't really get a chance to grow back again. We cut them all off equally. Everything's now still in full sun, so they will grow back. And also notice that the stools are placed very close together, and that is deliberate because it makes then the tree be straight, because it's going for a very narrow hole in the sky, if you like, a very light space that it's heading for. And so we're getting straight, fast growth. So let's just rewind a little bit now. So why do they do this even? It's an interesting thing. George Monbiot has a very strong idea as to why a lot of the temperate trees, in fact, a lot of the broadleaf trees in Africa do this too. And he thinks that the plants have co-evolved with large mammals like elephants. Monbiot likes to remind us that only, I don't know, 35,000 years ago or something, there were loads and loads of elephants in the UK. And you find their bones everywhere. And even when they excavated Trafalgar Square, they found bones of elephants and hippos that used to be here in the UK. even when we had the similar climate as what we have now. So imagine some of these understory trees, very, very tough, box and holly and yew, but also things that snap, these chestnuts and even oak and ash, is even if you snap it off at the base, so I don't know, maybe this is replicating what maybe a large mammal might do if it was to knock a tree over, it snaps, but if it's in light, it can grow back again. So evergreens don't have this property, but a lot of the broadleafs do. And what that means is that when we harvest the coppice, the tree is sent back almost in time, back to being the adolescent young tree again, and then it regains that ability to grow, to put on a lot of growth in a very short space of time. So it re-energizes the plant incredibly. You'd think it would wear it out, but it does the opposite. It re-energizes it. So we can come along and we can cut our chestnut poles, and as long as we keep the deer off until the stool is re-established, or other browser grazers, then it will regrow. We have a renewable resource that we can use again and again and again for many, many years. Chestnuts are very good wood to grow for coppice because it has a very straight grain. It's very easy to split chestnut with a wedge, and you literally just come on the end, split it one way, split it the other. Then you have 4 equal poles, which you can then build a structure out of. Lots of fences and gates made out of split chestnut poles, chestnut pales, many, many things. It's a very, very useful resource, and it would have been managed a lot. So this is what a renewable forest, a renewable wood resource looks like. It's coppice, because we're never killing the plant. The roots are always intact. The soil is never being left to erode away. Then it's very quickly covered again, very quickly shaded again, because the trees grow back very quickly. There's another consideration to this, though, is that plants are in balance. So if we cut the canopy off a tree, it can no longer, that's the root structure that it has is in proportion to the root, to the canopy. So remember, I told you that the water is evaporating from the canopy, which is drawing in water then from the root. So there's an as above, so below kind of relationship between the top and the bottom of the tree. So when we reduce the canopy, we cut the top off, that's going to shock the plant, and suddenly it doesn't need this massive root system. The root system will stay and carry on growing, but it will shed a lot of that root matter. And so the plant basically is going to dump loads of carbon deep into the soil. It's translocating carbon. It's doing exactly that thing that we said, whether it was yesterday or the day before, that what we're trying to achieve in terms of fighting climate change. We want to get carbon deep into the ground, and we want to use plants to translate, to be the translators of that process. So coppicing gives us a genuinely renewable resource. It gives us something that we can shape and produce it even in line with how we intend to use it. It creates a long-term stable systems for infiltrating water, building soil, reducing soil erosion, and it also stacks away a lot of carbon. This is something which we used to do massively in Britain and probably all the other countries too, especially in the Western European nations. But we've largely stopped maintaining them. And when you stop maintaining coppice systems, then they kind of die off, or they get choked out, or they need to be managed to really keep them at the optimum productivity. So here's more coppice. This is hazel. Now hazels are another really good one to coppice. A lot of the structures that we used to build, wattle and daub buildings, was a lattice work of split coppice wood woven together and daubed with mud. And we would have used things like hazel and chestnut and sycamore and even oak, different structures to great strength. Again, we can see there's the stool of the hazel that this gentleman's already coppiced, is already harvested. And you'll notice also is It's narrow diameter wood. He doesn't need power tools. He's doing it with a handsaw. There's something really good about not having to use a chainsaw. I hate chainsaws. I used to like using them. I used to think they were kind of a bit macho and exciting to be cutting up stuff, but they're so noisy. They're so dangerous. They're burning oil. They're breathing the fumes. I don't like them. I like hand tools. A hazel tree will grow for about 80 years and then kind of get a bit choked and then fall over and die. They're not long livers. However, there are hazel stumps, hazel stools that are hundreds of years old because, as I say, they're re-energized by the coppicing process. There's a small leaf lime stump in Kent, I think it is, that has been continually coppiced for 2,000 years, and it's still producing. So we need to use our imagination here, start to think, aha, plants, this kind of relationship with plants stacks away a lot of carbon, gives us a lot of really genuinely sustainable materials to use, but this could be a tool in climate change. But then also when you add this to biochar, you realize, oh, so we could not only stack away of carbon into the ground, but we could use some of this, the residues from the coppice, to release energy, to create heat. With that heat, we could cook soil to make sterile soil. We could dry out wood. We could heat homes. We could make electricity. We can do all of those things with heat. But then the residue behind is charcoal, is biochar, which might turn out to be more valuable than any other part of the whole process. So interesting. So yeah, I'm a big fan of coppice, and you're going to see some in action, some things that we've been developing in Llanfachlin on Saturday. Okay, look, it's 12 o'clock. We've got an hour. Let's just have a quick 5 minutes or a quick 10 minutes. Say, we'll come back together at 12:15. I'll give you 12 minutes just to have a stretch and refocus. So I'll see you in 12 minutes, and I will pause the recording. Okay, it's 15:15. I'm going to resume the recording, and we're back in the food forest. Back looking at forest systems. This is a food forest system in a place called Tabwa, which is near Coimbra in the northern part of Portugal, a mountainous area. I'm going to go back 2 more slides. Actually, we'll start here on food forests. And the first thing I wanted to show you was this is planting a food forest. This was in 2009 on a PDC that we did at Llanfachlin Workhouse. Perhaps if we have time at the weekend, this is something which we could go and see. So this was it being planted in 2009. It was quite a big PDC, that one. I seem to remember. Hi, Lindsay. Yeah, we just started just a second ago, and we're looking at a slide of a group of people planting a food forest in Llanfachlin Workhouse, and that is close to where you might get a chance to visit there at the weekend. So contextualizing of that. This was quite a large PDC group, actually. It was one of the bigger courses we've done in the UK. We had 24 people on that. And because we had 24 people, I had quite a big budget. So I've been able to go off and buy a load of nice plants from a specialist sort of permaculture supplier. It was a nursery called Cool Temperate. I don't know if they're still going, but the guy, Phil, what was his name? Anyway, very, very knowledgeable guy on plant knowledge. In food forests, we're very interested in diversity. We're very interested in, bringing in other kinds of multi-functioning plants. So there's a whole world of discovery there to be had. I'll bring some books for the weekend. But there's a world of discovery there to be had. And talking of multiple yields, look, I'm running a PDC. I've charged these people money to come on it. That's created a budget. I've been able to go out and buy some nice plants. And with those plants, we can plant a garden, which now becomes a long-lasting legacy. And I'm very interested in this idea of legacy. So whenever we do something, even in the short term, can we do it in a way in which it creates a long-term yield or output? And a good way of doing that is planting fruit trees. Even better way of doing that is to plant them as a system, so that we have something that's a bit more productive and more resilient, because we've created a guild. So there is us planting that food system, and there it is, can't remember, a couple of years later. So that's a very young forest, and again, see the kind of the sheep desert around it. But we've got our, what ultimately will become our canopy trees, relative to each other. And there's our herbaceous, we've got a shrub layer of bushes and shrubs and currants and berries, and we've got herbaceous layer, jack by the hedge, or different sort of things. And there's probably quite a bit of nettle there as well. I chose this spot because there was a lot of nettle there, and I figured that that was telling me there was fertility, maybe fertility that's coming off from this farmland. So I thought, why not design a system that's going to harvest that energy and convert it into useful outputs. So if you go to Workhouse, you'll see this will now be an 11-year-old system. So give you a sense of that. And the thing, often the mistake that novice forest gardeners do, including me, often is to put the principal elements too close together. Because when you're putting them in, they're really small, and it's a little bit hard to visualize what the system might look like when it's older. But another thing is that when I had all of these plants and I was excited to design and build this garden, is Permaculture Workhouse really didn't know how it intended to use the space within it. And although they've got quite a lot of land, the main way they made income at the time was by hosting a large multi-stage festival, and that involved using a lot of the space. So I was also given a very small amount of space, so I crowded the plants in. But I also really wanted to get a result. I wanted to create something that was kind of really noticeable and impactful, and obviously we could learn from as well. So anyway, I critique my own work. It's a little bit tightly stacked together, but if that's the worst crime, you can always thin it out again afterwards. You know, it's not, and by planting things close together, you're guaranteeing the relationships are forming, because they're the proximity. So there's a young forest system as being planted as an outcome of a course that we're training about, and then there's the actual yield itself, which is now producing nicely every year. Lots of fruits are coming from it. Very kindly, some of the people from at the Workhouse a few years ago bought me some raspberry jam made from the garden. Anyway, so there's my one in Wales. Here's one in Portugal. Here's the same patterning, but it's a more mature system. Canopy trees, understory trees, herbaceous plants, shrubs, stacked together, three-dimensional system. So this woman's called Mary, and she and her partner Toivo, who actually really very recently passed away. So that's a very sad thing. She's talking about it, and then we're teaching about the layers there. Look at the thing. This is a PDC I ran in Portugal, again, quite a few years ago. This is the landscape that they're in. It's wooded, it's mountainous, and they were doing a slightly different kind of forest garden in that they weren't coming to a blank canvas. It wasn't like the roof garden. It wasn't like the one in I just showed you in Wales. It was already a mixed forest. But there's a lot of invasive non-indigenous trees in Portugal, and it's a problem. There's too much eucalyptus, and there's a lot of mimosa, which is a fast-growing nitrogen-fixing pioneer tree, and it's just gone away, and it's sort of everywhere, and it's choking out the indigenous plants. So part of the idea of the function, the yield of this idea, was to fell out and remove trees individually, create clearings, and then replace them with forest garden plants. It's just to slowly convert, if you like, a sort of a landscape which is dominated by invasive species, to change it to something that was then productive and more in tune with the ecology. So here's the kind of thing that we're talking about. Here's a clearing within a bigger space. And again, I think what I was saying about that lovely dappled light that you get in forest systems, those forest edges. There are lots of plants that love a mixture of light and shade. Very few plants actually like full sun all day long. Lots of forest edge kind of plants. So, sometimes I forget to say this. I'm going to say it now because I'm thinking of it. Is I'll put it on the where's the the chat? Is no chat. Why am I not seeing the chat? Oh, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to get too lost. Okay, whatever. I was going to put in the chat room. It's there's a website and it's called Plants for a Future, and the URL is pfaf.org, pfaf.org, Plants for a Future. It's a database of perennial plants with multiple uses. So if you this is ideal for forest gardening, and you want exactly that, temperate perennial plants with multiple uses. You can search the database on any category, and you can search on uses, on height, on preferred climate type, soil types and stuff like that. Have a look at it. It's really interesting. So there are many thousands of plants that we can go and look at for our forest garden systems, and we're always interested in those things that perform multiple functions and those things which work together in guilds. So here we are looking at, if you like, getting a sense of this is the natural kind of what forest system might look like there in Portugal. There are animals running through it. There are some deer, and there are some kind of wild pig. I can't remember what they called them. They have a funny name for them. Anyway, there's a kind of a wild pig, which annoyingly you're not allowed to harvest. There's very tight laws about hunting, and you need special permits to go after these pigs. So they can actually cause quite a lot of problems. But essentially, they're part of the yield of a forest system are the mammals that like to live in forests. So again, this is again, look, here's a natural woodland with a structure of overstory, understory, trees, shrubs, grasses, herbaceous plants, sort of layered together, catching hold in the light, giving a very sort of diverse mixed environment. So we can start to then introduce into that. Here we've got a plum tree, prunus species, many very useful plants within that. Here's bamboo. Of course, here's Boletus ceps mushroom growing in the forest floor. Again, just thinking about how the mycelial mat joins everything together, and how slowly your individual plants start to become a system, all joined together. Think about mycorrhizal fungi. So there's one kind of fungi. Here's another kind of fungi. This black spot growing on this sycamore leaf. It almost looks like it's diseased, doesn't it? It almost looks like it's a problem. Except for I took this photo in the autumn. This wasn't in Portugal, it was in Scotland. It doesn't really matter, but I took this photo in autumn. And what struck me is that this fungus that is consuming this leaf, this is very much part of the forest system as much as anything else. The tree, the sycamore, is just about to give up on its leaves. It's already starting to withdraw some of the nutrients. You can see it's going a little bit yellow, and it's getting ready to drop. So the forest floor is already digesting that leaf, ready. So by the time it hits the ground, it's ready to be reabsorbed back into the forest. The forest doesn't want to lose any of the nutrients that it's accumulated. So it's actually operating as strategically to hold on to things. This is back in Portugal. Another very, very important part of the system. I mentioned the termites in Africa. We have more ants. Ants are incredibly productive. And again, as they're munching down and digesting huge quantities of woody matter. Some ants and termites actually grow fungi on that to break it down, and they eat the fungi. They interact with it in many, many ways. Here we've just accidentally disturbed the nest, and they're running away with their egg cases because we've surprised them. I think this was a straw bench or something, and we just moved it. But again, just reminded me, a forest is primarily trees, that's what you see, but the forest is full of multiple elements that are all working together. So in your forest system, garden system, you want to value all of these things. You want to understand that they're all contributing in their own way. Hello. Hello. You come to join the class? Yeah, you're a little bit in the way there, darling. You just sit there if you like. This is cat number 2. I hear 2 cats. This is number 2. You're the one that's called number 1. I'm just going to close it. Getting a bit noisy and a bit hectic. Right, okay, here we go. So, valuing every component in a forest, understand that they're all contributing in some way, or some part of regulatory function. So although the ants might not be a yield for you, they're a yield of the forest. They're a part of that system. And of course, the ants are, there's a food source for many birds and other animals, shrews and voles, and everybody likes to eat ants pretty much. Actually, in Uganda, they like to eat ants there too as well. They're probably really nutritious. So let's not forget that forests include big mammals, and those big mammals perform very, very important roles within the forest. So if we go back to the forest clearing, where was that? Here. You can imagine now, okay, that was a moose. But anyway, deer. Imagine deer in forests. They maintain pathways. They use roots going through the forest. Deer don't like to go into thick, dense vegetation. They're scared of that because there might be predators. They maintain clearings. Look, there's enough light now in this part of the forest for there to be grasses. So you can imagine suddenly a whole herd of deer might arrive and they might just eat everything. And they mark their territory as well by thrashing around with their antlers and knocking trees back. So they actually maintain open clearings and pathways, which lets more light into the forest, which allows for more diversity. Also, the deer are eating certain herbaceous plants and browsing leaves, and then distributing those seeds again in their dung. So they're actually performing a very important function within the forest of opening up and maintaining clearings and pathways. Now, if you get a situation like they have in Scotland, where there's so many deer that they've reached a point where they're very damaging to the forest systems, to often monocultural forest systems, that they're now having to go and cull the deer. Again, as George Monbiot points out very clearly in Feral and in his work on rewilding, is obviously the deer are only a problem because they don't have any predators. There's no relationship in place there to regulate their populations. You know, if we had wolves and lynxes, not only would they regulate the population of the deer, but also that they would change the behavior of the deer as well. They wouldn't go, they would be much less bold, they'd be more fearful, and therefore they would be less erosive as well. But still, very, very important part of a living system of these large mammals. Now, have another thing is when you're maintaining your forest garden, when you're maintaining your productive woodland system, your food forest, is one of the jobs that you're doing is all the time removing lower limbs, lopping branches, reducing the size perhaps of the larger trees and plants to ensure that the light still gets in. And again, really, in many ways, much of what you're doing is replicating the action of the mammals that aren't there. So when you're gardening and you're pruning and you're feeling sorry for the tree and what have you, realize that you're not, it's good to prune things hard. That would happen naturally. Someone would come along, a big moose might come along with its antlers and smash the lower branches of a tree to mark its territory. It might graze or browse off those leaves and shoots. And the trees are adapted to that. They've evolved to be able to cope with that. So think like a moose, you know, whatever. When you're in your forest garden, you're literally replicating the actions of those creatures. And when we think about large mammals, let's not forget the small mammals. Now, It's supposed to be a red shrew or something. What is it? I've forgotten what it is. It's not, so it's just a library picture. I was thinking, when I wrote this, I was thinking about the giant sequoia. There's massive redwood trees that you get on the Western Pacific coast. Those trees, some of the biggest trees on the planet and some of the longest living, is their seeds do not germinate unless they have passed through the gut of a particular vole. And the seeds are so, the nutrients are so carefully locked up inside that seed. And also the tree doesn't necessarily want them all to germinate at the same time. It wants them to travel away from the original mother plant and for them to germinate at different times to give themselves a chance to be successful. So you can imagine these creatures might take the seeds away and bury them and store them as a food store for later. And they might eat them, and they might not actually, they might just pass through their body, but the stomach acids and enzymes might just be enough to, to dissolve the outer coat of the seed. So now it becomes ready to germinate. So complex relationships between plants and animals, co-evolution, strategies that plants evolve to distribute their seed and to create a sort of staggered timeline of germination. Really interesting just to think about that. So this little shrew, now if I can get this right, I think that they become fertile at 2.5 weeks old. They have a gestation period of 2 weeks. So it can be 5 weeks old and already having babies. It's going to have several babies at a time, and it can have several gestation periods, obviously, in a season. So when the conditions are right, the populations of these things just like that, really, really fast. These things have a very high metabolism. They live life on kind of fast forward. They don't live very long. Apparently, every mammal has approximately the same number of heartbeats. So the things that live very long, they live, if you like, they manage to do it by living life at a slower pace. These little guys live life at a frenetic pace. They eat something like 2 or 3 times their own body weight in food a day, and so they're actually permanently hungry, and they're burrowing away underneath through the leaf mold, creating tunnels, creating aeration, creating pathways for water. They're eating the ants. They're distributing the seeds. They're eating bits of fungi. They're eating larvae of other insects. They're eating fruits. They're really omnivores. Imagine how they're accelerating that biodegradation process. They're kind of farming the mulch within the forest. And also they're a food source for just about every other larger mammal or bird. Owls and you name it, snakes, lizards. Everybody likes to eat voles. Come on, let's have a vole eating party. Maybe not us, but okay. Actually, cats hate them. They don't taste very. I think they don't taste very nice. So anyway, they like shrews, but not voles. Was the way around? That's a shrew. Well, whatever. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. Okay, we looked at these. So the multiple yields from forest systems and multiple elements within forest systems. That's our thing. I wanted to do one more presentation before lunch, and it's this one. Just check I'm on the right. Screen share. A bit more about biochar. Over the years, I've got more and more obsessed with this. I did this presentation for, it was supposed to be 10 minutes, but I didn't manage to complete it in 10 minutes. We got a slot at the Hay Book Fair a few years ago, Hay Festival, and in a sort of bio-innovation area. And we wanted to kind of present biochar as a exciting new product. What I realized was it's so far away from how most people are thinking. It's a difficult thing to explain in a short space of time, but anyway, interesting. So I'm excited about biochar. It could be a very, very important part of our fight against climate change. Now, we have to turn land use from +5 gigatons to -5 gigatons as quickly as we can. I think biochar's big part of how we do that. Obviously, organic methods, zero till, mob grazing, doing coppice, all of those things. If you also imagine all of these things could integrate together. Now imagine we farm our hedges differently, we manage our hedges differently so that we can get a biochar yield. We create more coppice, we do more organic systems, more use of compost. That's going to promote higher carbon into soils as well, etc., etc. I'm very, very interested in ways in which we could stack a tree yield into as many different systems, productive systems, as we can. And one of the key things we're doing with that tree yield, apart from one of the high value things that we might be getting it from it, is making biochar. But also, I just add, you could make biochar out of anything. You just need the right kind of kiln. So you could make it out of rice husks. They burn 350 million tons of rice husks in Indonesia, says Albert Bates in the book Biochar Solution. When I was in Rwanda this year, I was in a rice growing part of the country there. I got very excited about their rice husks. Actually, people are beginning to understand the value of some of these crop residues. But imagine you're a pistachio nut farmer, or you're even a grape farmer. You're going to have loads of vine stalks. You're going to have pistachio nut shells. These things now become highly valuable things that you could get energy from, and you can return to the soil, return to the system as biochar. I don't know. This is to try to bring you down under the soil, through the sward, what we're used to seeing, thinking about the life in the soil and realizing what we've already talked about. We're building a relationship with the life in the soil. Okay, we already touched on that. And we're understanding that that includes all these mycorrhizal fungi and all these other crazy things. And in fact, fungal hyphae, these structures that we're looking at here, are made out of hard carbon. So the more mycorrhizal fungi is in the soil, the more then carbon residues become deposited as a result. So look how this tree is growing in association with the fungi, which is also a carbon sequestrating strategy. This is saying, where does the carbon go? Where is the carbon storage in a Great Lakes forest? So they've obviously done some maths. They've gone and looked at a forest system in North America, and of the total ecosystem carbon storage, 80 tons per acre. This is from Ohio, 80 tons an acre. So again, we're trying to then start to think about carbon sequestration strategies. 1% of that carbon is in the leaves of the tree. 40% of the carbon in the system is in the trunk. 13% is in the roots. So we've got 54% of the carbon is in the tree, and another 1% on the woody debris on the ground. So 55%. Some is stored in the soil, obviously, and some is also returning through respiration. Some of that is returning back to the atmosphere as CO2. And there's also a net photosynthetic value. Obviously, the tree's pulling CO2 in. The sun's coming out, a little bit more sucked back in. This actually balances with the figures I showed you the other day. But at any one time, if we take a snapshot of this system, 45% of the carbon is in the soil. And the stuff that's in the tree and in the leaves is also in danger of returning back to the atmosphere again, if that tree was to be harvested and used or burned or forest fire. Think of the carbon return coming from the west coast of America. Worrying. Okay, so we need to get that. We need to get the carbon in the soil. That's basically where the long-term repository is, and that's the target. This is a photo showing the impact of having carbon in the soil. We've got a contrast on the left between conventional farming. By conventional, we meaning ploughing, reseeding, and using nitrates. And on the right-hand side, we have carbon farming. So that's a much more permacultural type of approach. What they've been doing is injecting cattle manure into the ground and I don't know what other strategies they've been doing, but they've been increasing a deliberate carbon return going on this side, and on this side just normal, as I say, currently normal industrial farming. It looks like the animals in this system at times. We can see a lot of animal tracks, and we see an enormous amount of erosion on the conventional side. We see there's a lot of erosion of these trees. There's not as many plants on the edge, and therefore we've seen the banks breaking down, and we see all this exposed soil. On the other side, the trees have been kept intact. In fact, it's not good to let livestock into watercourses. You really would want to fence them off and keep them out, and instead have drinking troughs, maybe from boreholes, because they're going to worry the bank edges, they're going to graze and damage these trees, which means that there's much more possibility agricultural runoff to end up in the watercourse. Animals stand in the water, make it muddy, they release manure and stuff and nitrates into the river. That affects the breeding and fish and all sorts of other things as well. So keep animals out of watercourses. But obviously the most noticeable thing that we're looking at from this photo is that one side is green and the other side it ain't. The plants look slower and younger. Oh, look there, I can see grazing animals all over. It's quite a big landscape, isn't it? And on this side, it's much, much greener. So what we're seeing is the carbon in the soil has somehow increased the fertility, the water retention, and the water percolation. All of those three things, that's all really good things that we want. So this is another reason why we're interested in biochar. This is what humans do, is when we want to cultivate systems, we remove the trees. This tree represents a store of carbon that is 1,500 years. This tree began growing in 550 AD. It's older than the Prophet Muhammad. That's really, really interesting, isn't it? Look, there's the Magna Carta, registered relatively recently, and was cut down in 1891. So that represents a massive store of carbon that's now being released again. This is kind of what we do. And then if that wasn't bad enough, we then plow up these soils as well, which releases even more of the carbon. This is what we've been doing for time immemorial, and this is what we need to reverse. Albert's book was a game changer for me. I say half of it, the first half is like a rollicking action adventure story, and it tells the story of Orellana, Francisco Orellana, who was a Spanish sort of conquistador, retired army general in search of fortune, in search of his fortune. He had a band of merry men, I think only 30 or 40 of them. They climbed the Andes in Peru. They reached the top of the Andes and a pass and came down the other side into the interior of Latin America, into the Amazon basin. They were the first Europeans to have knowingly done that, and they were interested to see what they might find. What they found were the headwaters of the river Rio Negro, and they traveled down it on rafts for several days until they reached what they called an inland sea, the beginnings of the Amazon itself. And so from there, they realized that to navigate this amazing river, this inland waterway, they would need a boat. So he divided his men into two groups. One lot of them felled some trees at the bank of the river, started making planks and planking that wood, and they also made charcoal. And the other half of the men he sent back into the mountains. They scratched around until they found some iron ore. They carried that iron ore down the mountain, and on the side of the river, they forged 2,000 metal nails. With those nails and the planks, they built a ship. With that ship, they sailed 2,000 kilometers down the Amazon, out into the Atlantic Ocean, round the corner to the island of Hispaniola, where they were rejoined with their Spanish colleagues. Extraordinary journey. Orellana did not lose a man on that trip. Incredible. They kept diaries of their journey. And in their diaries, they reported that sometimes for miles at a time, the interior of this vast country was populated. There were towns, there were villages, there were sometimes, along the river for miles, fronts of settlement. Some of the villages, when they stopped and explored them, they were empty. There was no one there. They assumed perhaps the villagers are all up in the hills or off, gathering crops or doing what they were doing. They found food stores. They found plenty of food. They said the people lived well, they ate well. The level of development was comparable to Europe at the time. They even talked of glittering, distant white towers. Turns out the building would have been made probably out of wattle and daub or wooden structures, but with lime renders on the outside, which obviously dried out in the sun to make white, very dazzling structures. They said the land was cleared, there were fields, there were crops. The people, if they encountered them, were hostile. They fired arrows and threw spears and things at them, but they always managed to stay safe, staying out in the wide, huge Amazon River. The people didn't come and engage them directly in combat, so they were able to travel through without losing anybody. But it was this cultural journey, and they wrote all these diaries and kind of immortalized this journey. No one came back or repeated what they did many years, decades. I think it was, let's make up a date, 1534. That was when it happened, pretty much. And I don't know when it was that people came back, but maybe some years later. And by that time, obviously, gold fever had consumed the Spanish. They'd found the Incas, they'd found all these treasures, gold, and then the Spanish Main and all of that was happening at that time. So people came back to read the stories of Francisco Orellana and his men, and they interpreted these glittering white cities as being perhaps palaces that would have gold in them. So avaricious Europeans went back there to loot and pillage, and what they found was nothing. They found dense rainforest. They found it was black and oppressive and dark and overgrown. They figured that Orellana had either lied to make himself look impressive, or perhaps they fantasized and hallucinated. I don't know. Whatever it was that they thought was, whatever it was that they had reported, it certainly wasn't there anymore. And that story was forgotten. And it's only really in the last decade that that story has picked up again. So these are the things that they came back, that large parts of the Amazon rainforest were maybe only 500 years old. We think it's of this natural environment, and it isn't. It's a growed back over farmland. And one of the reasons that they know this is because of the predominance of useful trees. There's way more edible plants than there should be statistically in parts of the Amazon, especially the parts that Orellana had reported as being settled 500 years ago. So that kind of tells us that perhaps it's a regrowth of what had been a food forest. So maybe, and there's now actually a glowing realization that the same thing happened in Eastern USA when the Pilgrim Fathers arrived there. They found quite a benign and beneficial landscape, but there were no fields or enclosures, so they saw it as, they thought it was wild, but it wasn't. It was being maintained with First Nation people who were forest farmers. Makes a lot of sense, When you're forest gardening, it doesn't really matter who owns the land or who owns the plant. As you're walking past, if it's ripe, you may eat it. Okay, so I'm getting ahead of myself, but basically the core of the debate around this is that there may have been 20 million people living in the Amazon 500 years ago. There might have actually been a lot more than that, 70 million, who knows? But the point is that the contention is this, it's not possible to have settled, dense civilizations without farming, without agriculture. And agriculture usually means growing things that store grains, maize, wheat, rice, that sort of stuff. So, and they couldn't have been doing that because you can't do agriculture in tropical rainforest soils because they're too thin. You've got a thin mulch there, and then you've got this sort of laterite underneath, which doesn't sustain long-term cultivation. You can't plow it. So, can't possibly have happened because you can't provide a food source for people in such an environment. Or maybe they were the most sophisticated farmers ever, and that they had found a way to do it, and that way died with them. Oh, so where did they go? Why did they die? If they had such a great food system, why did they die? I think we know. Smallpox, influenza. The people who settled Latin America, who'd walked all the way down the Andean chain through the Mesoamerican isthmus into northern South America, and then all the way down to the Andes, those people came from a relatively narrow gene pool. And that gene pool that they were descended from had no resistance to smallpox and influenza. Why not? Well, Jared Diamond answers that in the book Guns, Germs and Steel, and it's a fascinating read. Influenza is a disease that crossed over from pigs. So Westerners have a resistance to that disease because we've grown up in and around pigs within our household. So now we have evolved antibodies that stop us from dying of that disease. It's not so disastrous. Smallpox, well, we also grew up with cows, very closely related to us. And as we know, that you get a milder form of smallpox in forms of cowpox. And milkmaids always had quite often had a scar on their hand from this pock mark from getting cowpox. And then from that, we derived, really understand the basic mechanism of how a vaccine might work. So, and we grew up in close proximity to the animals that these diseases have crossed over from. So to a large degree, the Western genome, Western persons have a greater degree of resilience to those particular infections. There's no cows and there's no pigs in South America. In fact, there's no domesticatable animals at all in South America. In the Andes, they have the guinea pig, which they have as a food animal, and they use llamas and alpacas high up in the mountains, about 10,000 feet, as beasts of burden. But they don't live down in the lowlands, and neither of them will pull a plow. You certainly can't pull a plow with a guinea pig. So that created a different kind of farming system. They had to innovate in different ways. So there was a weakness, if you like, a sense of a vulnerability to these particular diseases. And unfortunately, those diseases would have been transmitted by the Spanish when they came, and that led to a mass die-off of 92% or more of the indigenous people. So diseases of infectious diseases have had a very, very big part in shaping the structure of our world, and it has not stopped. So part of this tragedy was that. And so what happened was, imagine a culture that the only visible thing you leave behind is fertile soil, because everything else that you created is just reclaimed by the forest. Everything that you built was made from natural and local resources, biodegradable resources. Interesting. So when they go back to these places, Oriana had identified and said that they were settled. And if you dig down through the soil, this is what you find. Here's different varieties of it. Look, but this is often what you see. You can see these yellow laterite soils, a little bit of humus at the top, and then it quickly goes yellow and poor and obviously quite alkaline. Very hard to grow plants in. But this is what they find where there's been settlement is black earth. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 feet down. Blimey, 10 feet of black earth, fertile topsoil. Now you don't get black soil under rainforests. So they looked at it and they thought, well, where's this come from? They look at it really closely, and what they realize is, so they call it terra preta, which means black earth in Portuguese. Terra preta. And when you look at it under a microscope, firstly, when you look at it with your hands and you feel it and work with it, you find pottery shards in it, which makes you think, this could be man-made. And then when you look under a microscope, it has very small particles of charcoal. And again, not the kind of bit of slash and burn would release a bit of charcoal, but not meters of it. So now you've got to remember, all of this is speculation because these people are gone. the cultural memory that they had has gone with them, and we can only guess. And we don't know how to make terra preta. No one's made any yet, but they clearly knew how to do it. And the extraordinary thing about it is when we grow in it, it's incredibly fertile. It and has many other distinct advantages, and we'll enlarge on some of those things as we go forward also. So look, back to this carbon cycle. I've talked a lot about it. The trees translate the atmosphere into stored carbon, and most of that, as biomass decomposes or burns, returns to the atmosphere again. So what we're doing, what we're proposing here, is the tree is bringing that, we're harvesting that biomass, we're interrupting with this process, and instead of allowing it to just decompose, we pyrolyze it. We're going to explain what that is. By pyrolyzing it, we release a lot of energy, of gas, bio-oil, of which that creates, in burning that, we co-create the biochar, which is 50% of the carbon that was in the tree is now captured long term, and the 50% perhaps it gets combusted in the process of releasing the energy, releases loads and loads of heat, and that heat produces the biochar, but we can also do other things with it as well. So now we've got a method in which we can extract maybe 50% of the stored carbon from plants and put it into a material that with that material we can build other things. So this is interesting, I think. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about wood combustion with the last minute or two that we have. We've all probably seen versions of this oven. This is a wood pyrolysis thermal mass oven. A faggot oven, we used to call them. A faggot being a bunch of sticks, right? Narrow diameter sticks, dry. Ooh, the kind of thing we produce in coppice. Narrow diameter sticks will dry much quicker than thick ones. So that's an advantage. And also is they'll dry because they again narrow, they burn, they combust very quickly, produce a lot of heat. Now, the next thing to say is that the hotter wood doesn't really burn. It wood thermally degrades. Hang on a second, sorry. Wood doesn't burn; it kind of thermally degrades. This is really the thing that we need to understand. And I'm sorry, we're just going to go a couple of minutes over. Is if I take that fuel, I take that piece of wood and I heat it up, in an oxygen-deprived environment, then what happens is it can't burn. So, but as it thermally degrades in the heat, it gives off volatile, flammable gases and tars, hydrogen, methane, and oily things like creosote, all of which are very, very combustible. And so as we heat up the wood, it gives off these combustible gases. As they burn, as they mix with air, they release an awful lot of heat. And the second part of the burning, the charcoal itself might burn, or we can contain it, and we can prevent we can end the combustion just at the point where we've given off the volatile gases and oils, and we've prevent then the carbon part from also burning, because we all know charcoal will also burn, but it burns at a separate stage. It's like there's two parts to the combustion of wood. So in these ovens, you would combust the charcoal and the wood gas, but there's something very important that happens in it, and this is the key point we need to get to, is that wood, if you burn it on the ground in the air, it will burn all the way at 400 degrees centigrade and give off a certain amount of heat, and you can use that. But actually, most of the energy in that wood did not burn, and it goes off as smoke. And you have to understand that smoke is unburnt fuel. So if instead, if we could have captured all of those gases and combusted them properly, we'd get a lot more heat and a lot more combustion, and also a lot less pollution. So if smoke's unburnt fuel, can we control the burn in a way in which everything does get properly burnt? And this is the thing, this is the realization, is that at 400 degrees, we're only releasing 20% of the energy in the fuel. We need to get the temperature to be much higher, more like 1200 degrees. How do you get something to burn hotter and faster? Is you blow air on it, okay? That's how you do it. So this is what this oven does, is you put your sticks in there, you put your faggots in there, and you light them, and they start burning at 400 degrees. They burn and burn and burn, and then I've watched somebody do this, and with a rake, you pull the burning embers back to the front of the stove a little bit, and you can imagine as now the inside is now heating up, and then suddenly, as you reach a critical point, so it burns and it's smoky and it's just getting going, and suddenly something happens at a certain temperature. Is the air starts to feed back on itself. The oven starts to feed back on itself. It sucks the air in as obviously the fire's burning, so it's sucking air in over the fire. The air hits the back of the oven, and the oven's roof is domed. So for the air to leave, the only way it can get out again is it's hit the back of the oven. The only way it can leave is by arcing around and coming out over the top. So it's sucking at the bottom and it's blowing out at the top. And the thing is that because the air comes in on a straight line and has to leave on a curved line, it has to accelerate to get out. And obviously warm air expands, so the hotter it is in the oven, the faster this rocketing effect is. So that it sucks and blows at the same time. And suddenly the temperature inside jumps from 400 degrees to 1200. Suddenly everything is combusted. The wood releases all of those flammable, combustible gases and oils. And this is a photo I took of one of these ovens, just at the point where it really takes off. And you can see, look, there, you can see it's sucking air in the bottom. It's going all the way around the roof of the oven and then coming out the top. And you can see it's almost like a plasma. It almost looks like the sun. That's now so hot in it. Instead of being 400 degrees, this is about 1200 degrees. And that's why those ovens have all of these bricks and rocks, is thermal mass that's going to absorb and catch and hold that heat. So you can now cook in this. These ovens, you wait till they're hot. So it's called a falling oven. Once it's got hot, you can then start putting things into it, and it might stay hot for 2 days. You might still be cooking off little biscuits and pastries the second day after you've lit it. So this is wood pyrolysis. So we can now use clever strategies to get the wood gasification part and then stop the combustion. So we're left with the char, and then we've got that to work with. So I'm going to pause because we've gone out of time. So I have overrun by 5 minutes. I'm sorry about that. And we'll get back together this evening and I'll talk a bit more about all of these processes, because we're going to make some biochar. We're going to think more about how we can use it on the farm over the weekend. So I'll record that and post that, because I know some of you will be traveling. And anyway, thanks for your attention. I'm sorry for going over just by a few minutes. And I hope you found that interesting. So I will stop the recording. Where is that? There.